Familiarity mistaken for chemistry. You've been texting someone for weeks. They get your jokes, text back fast like the same shows, and suddenly you're convinced they're different, special, maybe the one. What actually happened? Your nervous system found a groove. Comfort registered as attraction. The relief of not having to explain yourself felt like recognition. That's familiarity hijacking your dopamine, one of the oldest tricks your brain plays on you in the search for love. The trap runs deep because safety is genuinely addictive. We move toward what we know, what feels easy, what requires less translation. But safety and spark are not the same language. You can be perfectly comfortable with someone and feel nothing when they touch you. Great conversation with zero current running underneath. The worst part? By the time you notice the gap, you've already built a life around them. You've told your friends this person matters. You've imagined futures. Your sense of self has started to include them, and backing out feels like personal failure instead of correction. Here's where to pay attention. If most of your excitement comes from how easily they fit your life rather than who they actually are as a separate human being, that's a signal to pause before you go further. Real chemistry doesn't just feel comfortable, it feels alive. It makes you want to know more, not just feel at ease. It creates a pull, not just a fit. The person who gets your jokes matters far less than the person who makes you feel seen in a way you didn't know you needed. One is repetition playing back to you. The other is a real signal, and learning to tell them apart might be the most important skill you'll develop in dating. Mere exposure and proximity. You probably remember the exact moment you started noticing someone, or do you? Here's what actually happens. You see them once, then again at the coffee shop, then in the hallway, and somewhere between the third and fifth time, your brain flips a switch. Suddenly, they seem more attractive, funnier, like maybe you've always known them. That's not fate. That's mere exposure, and it's running your dating life more than you'd like to admit. Psychologist Robert Zajonc proved this decades ago. The more you encounter something neutral or mildly pleasant, the more you like it. It's why songs you skip on first listen become obsessions after 10 plays. It's why your coworker went from invisible to magnetic. Proximity does the heavy lifting here. If someone shares your coffee shop, your gym, your friend group, they're not competing on their merits alone. They're competing with the sheer mathematical advantage of being in front of you. Your brain mistakes familiarity for compatibility. You assume comfort means attraction. The person across the room has to be twice as interesting to stand a chance against the person who passes your desk every morning. So here's what makes this sneaky. You'll absolutely convince yourself you chose them for deeper reasons. You'll list their qualities, the meaningful conversations, the way they get you, all true. But peel back that first layer and ask yourself how many people outside your daily geography might have matched better if they just had the chance to get regular. That's the real dating game nobody talks about. And your proximity usually decides it before your heart has a real say. Halo effect in attraction. You walk into a room and see someone laughing at a table, genuinely, unselfconsciously laughing. Something in that moment shifts. Suddenly, their face looks sharper, their voice sounds warmer, the way they move feels effortless. But here's the thing, nothing about their actual features changed. What changed was the light you were seeing them in. That light is the halo effect, and it runs your dating life more than you think. One positive trait, confidence, humor, kindness, even just being present in the moment, throws a glow over everything else. You don't evaluate them piece by piece. Instead, that single brightness spreads, and you start crediting them with other good things they may or may not have. Attractive people are assumed to be smarter, Funny people are assumed to be deeper. Someone who listens well is suddenly trustworthy about everything. The danger isn't the initial glow. Attraction needs some light to start. The danger is the speed at which you stop looking. You meet someone charismatic, and your brain basically says, okay, checks out, and moves on, skipping the part where you'd normally notice incompatibilities or red flags buried underneath. That halo stays so bright in the early months that you genuinely don't see what's there. So the next time you catch yourself thinking someone is perfect, or finding yourself excusing behavior you'd normally call out, ask what specifically you actually know versus what you've assumed from the shine of one thing they do really well. That gap between the halo and the person is usually where the story gets real. Anchoring on first impressions. You walk into a coffee shop and lock eyes with someone for maybe 2 seconds. In that blink, your brain has already made 1,000 micro decisions. Their posture, the way they're holding their cup, whether they smiled at you or looked away. That first snapshot becomes the anchor, and everything that happens after gets filtered through it. If you decided they were warm, you notice their jokes. If you peg them as cold, you interpret the same laugh as defensive or fake. You are not actually learning who they are. You are collecting evidence for the person you already decided they were. The first date goes well, so you show up to date 2 already convinced they are your person, which means you forgive the lateness or the weird comment that would normally make you pause. Or the opposite. One bad signal at the start, and you spend weeks looking for proof you were right to feel skeptical. The anchor pulls so hard because your brain is lazy. It is easier to stick with the initial read than to update it constantly. Changing your mind feels like admitting you were wrong, and that stings. So you stay locked into the story you wrote in the first 30 seconds. The move here is not to ignore first impressions. They exist for a reason, but to treat them like a hypothesis, not a verdict. Notice what you decided. Then ask, what have I seen since that contradicts it? If the answer is nothing, you might be filtering. That small awareness can crack the anchor before certainty hardens. Thin slicing accuracy limits. You meet someone at a party, and in the first 90 seconds, you know they're your type. Their energy, the way they tilt their head when they laugh, something clicks and you feel it in your chest. That lightning-fast red is called thin slicing, your brain taking a small slice of data and building an entire prediction from it. The trouble is that thin slicing works beautifully for some things, like whether someone is genuinely kind or performing kindness, but it breaks down hard in the domain of romantic compatibility. A single interaction cannot tell you how someone handles conflict when stakes are high, whether they'll still respect you in 3 years, or if their values actually align with yours when money gets tight. What feels like intuition is often just pattern matching based on surface traits you find magnetic: confidence, humor, physical attraction, the way they make you feel seen in that moment. Your nervous system mistakes novelty and arousal for destiny. And here's the real kicker. People who pride themselves on reading others quickly often become the most blindsided by breakups because they stopped updating their map once that first impression locked in. The person who seemed so self-aware turned out to be avoidant. The energy that felt boundless was actually manic. You weren't wrong to sense something real. You were just incomplete. The move isn't to ignore your first read. It's to treat it like the opening sentence of a book, not the whole story. Let curiosity stay open longer than your certainty wants to, because 3 months of small moments will teach you what 90 seconds cannot. Facial averageness preference. You've swiped past someone with sharp, unusual features and felt your attention land instead on a face that seemed almost symmetrical, ordinary, nearly forgettable, and you wondered if your taste was broken. There's something wired deep into how we scan for mates, and it has almost nothing to do with exotic or striking. Researchers have found that when they blend many faces together, the resulting average face, literally the mathematical mean of dozens of features, gets rated as more attractive than almost any single face that made it. It feels backwards. We think we want interesting, memorable, rare. What actually pulls us is something closer to a statistical middle ground, a facial consensus that your nervous system reads as safe and settled. The logic is straightforward. Averageness signals genetic diversity and health markers. A face sitting at the population middle has likely avoided extreme genetic drift or weird recessive traits. Boring survived for a reason. Your ancestors didn't pair bond with whoever looked most rare. They chose someone whose face whispered genetic solidity. But here's where it gets slippery. Culture, money, and media have become very good at convincing you that specific unusual features are peak beauty. A cheekbone angle gets fetishized for a decade and suddenly feels like the goal. You start hunting for asymmetry or an unconventional jaw, believing it's your true preference. Meanwhile, the average-faced person in the room keeps getting second chances and callbacks because something in you, older than your conscious mind, keeps finding them trustworthy. The pull toward them isn't boring. It's ancient biology wearing a quiet face. Next time you find yourself drawn to someone, ask whether they feel rare or familiar. That answer tells you if you're following culture or your own oldest code. Symmetry as a health signal. You've probably noticed it without knowing you were noticing. The way a face that's balanced somehow feels trustworthy, magnetic, easier to love. Your brain is doing something ancient here, and it has almost nothing to do with fashion magazines. Symmetry, in evolutionary terms, is a whisper that someone's body developed without major disruptions. It suggests good genes, low disease burden during childhood, and a fairly stable immune system. When parasites or infections hit during development, they leave asymmetrical marks. A slightly crooked nose, one ear set higher, a hand a fraction smaller than its twin. Symmetry is the opposite of that mess. It's the sound of a body that got lucky and stayed intact. Now here's where it gets real in dating. You are drawn to symmetry not because you consciously think, yes, optimal immune function, but because your nervous system processes it as safe, as strong, as someone whose body kept its promises to itself. This works both ways too. When you walk into a room holding yourself with balance and presence, when your movements don't betray tension or damage, people feel it before they think it. They're reading you like a book written in your posture and proportion. But here's the truth that changes the game. Symmetry isn't everything. It's a signal, not a destiny. A slightly off-center face with genuine warmth and presence beats a mathematically perfect one with coldness every single time. The real move is learning to recognize why symmetry catches you in the first place, so you don't mistakenly build a whole future on a biological first impression. Voice pitch and attraction. A woman texts you back in 40 minutes. A man sends a voice note instead. Before he even says hello, something shifts, not because of the words, but because of the frequencies his vocal cords are pushing into the air. Your brain catches that pitch the way it catches a face, and it's already making bets about who this person is before language even starts. Lower voices in men tend to trigger attraction faster. They register, evolutionarily speaking, as markers of testosterone, size, and genetic health. even though a deep voice says almost nothing about actual reliability or character. Women with slightly higher voices often find themselves coded as younger, more fertile, more vulnerable. Neither of these whispers in the background feels like it's happening. It feels like preference, like knowing what you want. But you're not hearing neutral information. You're hearing biology speaking through tissue and air. The trap is that pitch isn't fixed. Men drop their voices around people they're attracted to. Women raise theirs. You do this without thinking, and the other person feels the shift like a door opening or closing. And here's where it gets strange. If someone mimics your pitch or cadence, you feel more connected to them, not because you consciously noticed, but because your mirror neurons fired. Sameness sounds like safety. So when you're on a date and you catch yourself suddenly speaking differently, you're not being fake, you're advertising. The question is whether you're aware enough to notice when attraction is doing the talking for you, or when someone else is doing the adjusting to reel you in. Scent and immune complementarity. You walk into a room and someone's perfume hits you. Not their face, not their voice, just the scent. Something in you either opens or closes. You think you're smelling them. What you're actually doing is running a biochemical compatibility test without knowing it. Your nose is sampling their immune system, checking whether your genetic immune profiles would make strong babies together. That's not poetry. That's literal biology wired into your attraction switch. Researchers found that people are drawn to scents of those with immune genes unlike their own. The scientific term is the major histocompatibility complex, or MHC. Your body prefers the smell of someone whose immune defenses would complement yours, filling gaps, strengthening resilience. You are attracted to genetic foreignness in the nose-knowing part of your brain, the part that speaks before your conscious mind even arrives at the conversation. Here's where it gets real. That person you thought was just your type might be your immune type. When a couple stops finding each other's scent appealing, something in their compatibility has shifted, even if the rest feels fine. Birth control pills can scramble this signal entirely, making you attracted to the wrong immune match because they suppress the hormonal cascades that let your nose do its job. You fall for someone safe and similar instead of someone complementary, sometimes for years, until your body stops cooperating with the choice your brain made. Pay attention to who smells good to you, not cologne or soap, but the person underneath. That small magnetic pull is your ancient immune system still working, trying to build something strong. Misattribution of arousal. You walk into a bar and spot someone across the room. Your heart is pounding, your palms are warm, your chest feels tight. You think it's them. You think your body is telling you something true about connection, chemistry, fate. But here is what your nervous system is actually saying. Something just happened. It could be anything. You might have just climbed the stairs. You might be anxious about your job. You might have had too much coffee. Your body does not know the difference between adrenaline born from danger and adrenaline born from attraction, and neither do you if you're not paying attention. Your brain sees the person, feels the surge, and draws the fastest line between them. It calls it love. It calls it destiny. But that buzz could belong to 100 different moments. The famous suspension bridge experiment proved this. People actually afraid, actually flooded with adrenaline, rated photos of strangers as more attractive than people on a stable bridge. Same person, same photo, different body state. So that wild feeling you get around someone might be saying nothing about them at all. It might be saying everything about where you are, what you just did, or what you are already afraid of. The next time you feel that unmistakable pull, pause for a breath and ask, is this about them or is this about the tremor they are standing in? That small question could save you from chasing someone who is really just a mirror for your own alarm. Your body is not a compass pointing toward love, it is a smoke detector. Wanting versus liking systems. You chase someone for months and the pursuit is electric. Dopamine on fire, checking your phone every 30 seconds, rewriting half responses as love letters. Then one day, they text back with genuine enthusiasm and something inside you goes cold. The thrill was never about them. It was about the chase. Your brain runs two completely separate systems when it comes to attraction and connection, and they almost never activate at the same time. One system, the wanting system, lights up during pursuit, scarcity, and uncertainty. It's dopamine-driven, craving the gap between where you are and where you want to be, the pull of something just out of reach. The other system, the liking system, activates around safety, presence, and actual connection. It's quieter, chemical-based in endorphins and opioids, less Hollywood dramatic, but infinitely stickier over time. We spend our entire dating lives confusing these two as if they were the same thing. You feel the wanting surge and call it love, so you pursue harder, believing the intensity means something deep about compatibility. But wanting without liking is just addiction wearing a nicer outfit. The person who wants you obsessively but doesn't actually like you is the person who will feel trapped the moment you stop being a puzzle to solve. If you're the one doing the chasing, ask yourself something honest in the quiet hours. What specifically do I like about this person when they're not pursuing me back? What do I actually know about their ordinary life, their values, who they are when nobody's watching? The answer tells you everything about whether you're building something real or just riding the dopamine wave until it crashes. Novelty seeking and dopamine. Your phone buzzes at 11 p.m. and your chest tightens. It might be them. That rush flooding your system is dopamine, your brain's novelty chemical, and it's absolutely feral when things are new and uncertain. Here's what most people miss. Your brain doesn't actually care about the person yet. It cares about the gap. Dopamine spikes when there's a difference between what you expect and what happens next. You didn't know if they'd text back. You didn't know what they'd say. That uncertainty, that not knowing, is the fuel that makes your nervous system light up like fireworks. A surprise text, an unpredictable kiss, a date that spirals somewhere unplanned. Each one is a small win for your reward system. But dating has a trap built into this chemistry. Novelty has a shelf life, and most people mistake the fade for a sign the person is wrong. 6 months in, they're consistent. They text back the same way. They show up predictably. The dopamine dip feels identical to falling out of love, except it's not. It's just your nervous system downshifting into baseline. People who chase that high across relationship after relationship aren't shallow. They're literally chasing a neurochemical state that routine will always dissolve. If you notice yourself losing interest the moment someone becomes dependable, that's your signal to pause. Not because something's broken in you, but because you're about to make a choice based on brain chemistry instead of actual connection. The next layer of attraction doesn't shout like dopamine does. It builds slower, stays longer, whispers instead of screams. Limerence as an altered state. Remember that time you couldn't sleep because someone texted you back? Your brain wasn't tired. It was flooded. That feeling isn't love yet. It's something closer to temporary insanity. And psychologist Dorothy Tenov named it limerence. A cognitive state where another person becomes the organizing principle of your entire nervous system. Your pupils dilate. Your appetite vanishes. You replay conversations for hours, rewriting the parts where you wish you'd been cooler. You drive past their house, you read their Instagram from 2015, and the weirdest part, you feel completely sane while doing it. That's how seamless the altered state is. It wraps itself in the language of clarity. In limerence, your brain is hijacked by a fantasy version of this person. They say something mediocre, and you'll find it profound. They're late, and you'll assume they're drowning in work. Their flaws become features. Distance becomes mystery. Coldness becomes depth. What's firing neurologically is your dopamine reward system on overdrive, while your prefrontal cortex, the part that asks hard questions, has clocked out. This matters because limerence has an expiration date, usually 2 to 3 years max. It fades whether the relationship works or not. When it does, you wake up next to someone you don't actually know that well, or worse, you realize you chased someone who was never worth the mania. The brutal truth is how little control you have over the timeline. It burns through you on its own schedule, indifferent to your best intentions. The move is simple, but saves you. In that flooded state, treat your own judgment like a faulty compass. Don't make permanent decisions while your brain is on fire. Idealization and the pedestal. You know that moment when someone new texts you back faster than you expected and suddenly they seem almost flawless? That's not love arriving. That's your brain building a statue out of a person. Idealization is what happens when we take the tiny facts we actually know and use them as scaffolding for an entire fantasy. He's kind to the waiter, so he must be kind to everyone. She laughs at your jokes, so she must find you endlessly interesting. Reality becomes optional. What matters is the gap between who they are and who you've decided they could be. And that gap is intoxicating because it's filled with possibility, with the version of yourself you imagine they'll unlock. The pedestal feels like reverence, but it's actually a form of erasure. You're not seeing them. You're seeing your own longing reflected back at you, and here's where the trap gets sticky. The higher the pedestal, the harder the fall, because eventually they'll say something mundane, or disagree with you, or mention an ex, and that single crack in the statue spreads fast. You'll feel fooled, betrayed, as if they lied to you when really you just stopped lying to yourself. The quieter move is to notice early when you're doing this, when you're assigning them virtues they haven't earned yet, or when you're not asking questions because you're afraid of the answers that might ruin the story. People worth chasing are people you can see clearly, flaws and all, scars included. The ones who survive the first real fight aren't the ones we idealized. They're the ones we actually knew from the start. Devaluation after idealization. You know that feeling when someone goes from perfect to suddenly impossibly wrong, not because they changed, but because you did. In the first weeks, your brain ran on dopamine, norepinephrine, a hit of pure novelty. Everything they did seemed like evidence of who you'd invented them to be. They laughed at your joke the way you'd always dreamed someone would laugh. They texted back in exactly the tone you'd been waiting for. Your mind filled in all the blanks with your own best hopes. Then something shifted. Maybe they were late to dinner. Maybe they made a joke that landed wrong. Maybe they just existed as an actual human with real flaws instead of the perfect mirror you'd projected. And suddenly, the entire structure collapsed. Not softly, catastrophically. The same person who felt like home last month now feels like a stranger. The things you loved became the things that make your skin crawl. Their quietness isn't peace, it's coldness. Their independence isn't attractive, it's indifference. What's actually happening? You're not falling out of love. You're waking up from a trance you built yourself. The idealization phase wasn't about them. It was about the story you told yourself you deserved. When reality doesn't match that script, the devaluation feels like betrayal. but they didn't lie. You just finally saw them. The next time you feel that crash, pause and ask, what did I believe about this person that I'd never tested? What gap did I fill with my own wish list? That question alone can stop the pendulum from swinging so hard the next time around. Chemistry versus compatibility. You know that feeling when someone walks in and your brain just lights up. The jokes land, the conversation flows, you feel seen. That's chemistry, and it feels like the whole story should end right there, like physics doesn't lie. But here's what nobody tells you until you're 3 years in with someone you had zero chemistry with. Chemistry is a preview, not a prediction. It's the opening credits, not the full film. Chemistry happens in your nervous system, dopamine and norepinephrine firing, your pupils dilating, your voice changing slightly because you're leaning forward. It's intoxicating and real, but also temporary. Compatibility is what remains after the chemical spell wears off. It's whether you actually want the same things, whether you fight fair, whether you can sit quietly together without your leg bouncing. It's whether you both see money the same way, whether you want kids or don't, whether one of you is building something and the other is watching Netflix. You can have explosive chemistry with someone who wants to move across the country while you stay put. Most people chase chemistry like it's a guarantee, then wonder why the person who made their heart race also made them feel unseen. Here's the real trap. Chemistry fades in most relationships, usually between 6 months and 2 years. When it does, you're left with what's actually underneath. So the real question isn't whether you have chemistry, it's whether you would choose them on a Tuesday when nobody is watching, when the dopamine settles, and you're alone together with just the facts of who you both are. Attachment styles as filters. You know how some people fall hard and fast, texting constantly, needing reassurance like oxygen, while others go silent for days and call it independence? That gap isn't random. It's your attachment style quietly running the whole show, filtering who you notice, who you trust, how you interpret their every move and silence. Think of it like a lens you didn't choose but can't seem to take off. When you're anxiously attached, you're scanning for abandonment signals in everything. A delayed text becomes proof they're losing interest. A calm evening feels like quiet rejection. A joke you don't quite get feels personal. When you're avoidant, you're doing the opposite, noticing the exact moment someone gets too close, feeling suffocated by their need, convincing yourself that independence is freedom and distance is self-respect. Secure attachment? You're basically looking at the same person and seeing someone trustworthy, even when things are murky or unclear. The wild part is that your filter doesn't just passively watch, it actively selects your whole dating life. An anxious person gravitates toward unavailable partners, interpreting distance as a puzzle to solve, a challenge worth the hurt. An avoidant person senses neediness from a mile away and bolts before intimacy can even form. A securely attached person, meanwhile, tends to find their way toward people who can actually show up. You're not choosing randomly, you're choosing through a template you learned long ago, often without knowing it exists. The filter becomes so familiar, you mistake it for chemistry, for fate itself, for the natural way love works. Naming your style means seeing the filter itself, not just what it shows you. And that moment of visibility is where your actual choice finally lives. The anxious avoidant trap. You know that feeling when you're texting someone and they take 3 hours to reply, and suddenly your chest tightens and you're scrolling their Instagram to see if they're online? That's the anxious brain in motion. And on the other end, there's probably someone who sees your message, feels that tiny spike of pressure, and decides to respond tomorrow. These two people, the anxious and the avoidant, find each other with an almost magnetic precision. And when they do, they create a loop that gets harder to escape the longer it runs. The anxious partner interprets slowness as rejection, so they reach out more, need more reassurance, send another message. The avoidant partner feels suffocated by that reach, so they pull away further, create distance, go quiet. Each move confirms what the other person already feared. Anxious thinks, see, they don't care. Avoidant thinks, they're too much. The painful irony is that they're often drawn to each other because of opposite wounds. The anxious person chases what feels unsafe, hoping to finally make it safe. The avoidant person runs from intensity because intimacy once meant loss or control, but the trap isn't inevitable and it doesn't require waiting for the other person to change. If you recognize yourself leaning toward either end, the real work is noticing the pattern itself without sliding into blame. Anxious, sometimes your reach out is actually the suffocation you're afraid of. Avoidant, sometimes your silence is exactly the rejection you're trying to escape. The moment you name the loop, you stop being entirely run by it, and that's where choice actually lives. That's where two people can choose something different. Attachment activation on withdrawal. You know that feeling when someone starts to pull away and suddenly they become more interesting to you. Not more interesting because they changed, more interesting because they're leaving. That shift, that magnetic pull you feel right as the door starts to close is your attachment system firing on all cylinders. It's not a glitch in your brain, it's a feature, and it was built to keep you alive thousands of years ago when being abandoned meant actual death. When a caregiver moves closer, your attachment system settles. You feel safe, you don't chase, but the moment there's distance, a missed text, a colder tone, them being unavailable, something flips. Your nervous system reads threat, and threat means you need to pull harder, reach further, become more worthy of attention. You don't think through this. Your body just starts. You might text again. You might replay conversations looking for what you did wrong. You might suddenly remember all the small kindnesses they showed you, as if those memories could build a bridge back. That's attachment activation at peak intensity, and it often feels like love. Here's the painful part. The people we chase hardest are often the ones triggering that withdrawal reflex most consistently. We mistake desperation for devotion, and they, sitting on the other side of that distance, might feel suffocated by how hard we're reaching. So the system that was supposed to bond us often pushes us further apart, especially in dating, where intermittent attention from someone we barely know yet can feel like genuine connection. The pattern becomes the addiction. Protest behavior after distance. You cancel plans twice because you're tired, and suddenly your partner texts more, calls more, shows up more. It feels like they're clingy or needy, but what's actually happening is protest behavior, a survival instinct so old it predates language. When attachment figures move away, we don't go quiet. We protest, we amplify, we try to pull them back. In animals, when a baby gets separated from its mother, the baby doesn't accept the loss. It cries louder, searches harder, becomes more visible and demanding. The same wiring lives in you. Distance, whether physical, emotional, or a sudden shift in attention, triggers an ancient alarm. Your nervous system reads it as a threat to survival, not because it logically is, but because that system was built for environments where being left behind meant death. So when you feel the urge to text again after no response, to ask where they are, to suddenly need their reassurance in that moment, you are not being irrational or desperate. You are being mammalian. Your system is saying, I notice you're pulling away and I'm going to increase my bid. Show me you still want me. The real trap is that protest behavior often backfires in ways that feel counterintuitive. The person you're chasing feels that increased pressure and pulls further away instead of closer. Two nervous systems in a dance, each one's solution making the other's problem worse. What actually works is knowing the pattern early enough to pause, to feel the urge without acting on it immediately, and to tell your partner what's happening underneath the noise, the fear that lives there. Deactivating strategies explained. You've been seeing someone for 3 months and things feel close, maybe too close. Then suddenly, you're picking fights over nothing, scrolling their Instagram with a critical eye, or cataloging every small disappointment they've caused you like evidence. That shift from warmth to distance isn't random. It's a survival move your nervous system learned long ago. Deactivating strategies are the ways you pull away when intimacy starts to feel unsafe and they work so smoothly you barely notice you're doing them. Some people learned early that closeness meant pain, a parent who vanished, or affection that came with strings. So your attachment system built a workaround. Instead of leaning in when connection offers itself, you create distance. You find reasons why this person isn't quite right. You mentally rehearse the breakup. You treat small friction like proof of incompatibility. Some people do it through coldness or criticism, others through busyness or sudden retreat into solo life. The trap is that deactivating feels like clarity. It sounds like you're being smart, protective, seeing the truth. But you're not protecting yourself from the other person. You're protecting yourself from needing them. And that protection costs you everything. Real intimacy demands the opposite. The willingness to stay close, even when it's uncomfortable, to work through friction instead of using it as an exit ramp. The next time you catch yourself building a case against someone you genuinely liked, pause. That internal prosecutor voice isn't wisdom. It's fear wearing a good judgment costume, and it's learned to sound perfectly reasonable. Fearful, avoidant push-pull. Watch someone who says they want love, but also seems to sabotage it the moment it arrives. That's the fearful avoidant in their truest form. They pull you close with intensity and vulnerability, and then the moment you start to actually show up, they push you away, sometimes cruelly, sometimes by simply vanishing. It feels like whiplash because it kind of is. The fearful avoidant has two competing needs wired so tight they can barely breathe near them at the same time. They want connection desperately, but they learned early that closeness is dangerous, that people leave or hurt or control, so they oscillate. They text you at 2 a.m. about their deepest fears, and 3 days later, they're cold, distant, picking fights over nothing. Here's what makes it stick. You start to organize your entire nervous system around predicting which version shows up. You chase when they pull away because you remember the sweetness. You flinch when they come close because you remember the sting. And they're doing the same thing, just in reverse, terrified of the very thing they're asking for. The painful part is that neither person is usually a villain. Both are running an old protection program that doesn't match the present. If you find yourself in this dance, the move isn't to fix them or to force consistency. It's to notice your own nervous system getting trained to chaos and to ask whether this particular pace feels sustainable for you. Because ultimately, fearful avoidance can only heal closeness through therapy and their own willingness, not through your patience. Earned secure attachment. You don't have to be the person your childhood made you, and that's not some greeting card lie. It's neuroscience wrapped in hope. Earned secure attachment means you grew up anxious, avoidant, or fractured. Maybe your parent was inconsistent, cold, or absent, but somewhere along the way, you did the work to become someone who can actually love and be loved without panic or sabotage. It's not about denial or pretending your history didn't matter. It's the opposite. It's looking directly at what happened and choosing a different relationship with it. Someone with earned security has usually spent time understanding why they cling or why they bolt, felt their own fear in their chest, and decided it didn't get the final word. They've probably failed at relationships a few times too, and instead of deciding love was broken, they decided they needed to grow. What makes this real is the friction it takes. A secure childhood is like inheriting money. You just have it. Earned security is like building it from scratch, which means noticing your patterns, sitting with discomfort, practicing trust with people who've shown they deserve it, and doing that work while your own nervous system is quietly lobbying for the familiar safety of your old wounds. The stakes feel higher because you're fighting your own biology every single day, and that fight is exactly what makes earned attachment so potent in relationships. You're not clinging because you're desperate or fleeing because you're scared. You're staying because you learned how to stay. That choice, repeated 1,000 small times, rewires you deeper than any secure childhood ever could. Imago and parental templates. You meet someone, and before you've finished your second coffee, you're already inside a movie you didn't know was playing. They laugh a certain way, maybe a little reserved, maybe a little too loud, and suddenly you're running a script that has nothing to do with who they actually are. That script is your imago, the unconscious blueprint built from the people who raised you, not necessarily who you loved, but who shaped the groove your nervous system learned to recognize as home. If your father was distant and your mother was the emotional translator, you might chase people who feel cool until you crack them open. If your parents were chaotic, you might hunt for someone reassuringly boring. If one parent was absent, you might pick people just slightly unavailable, familiar in their elusiveness. Here's what makes it strange. You can meet someone genuinely wonderful, someone who would be good for you, and feel absolutely nothing because they don't match the template. Meanwhile, someone who triggers your old wounds can feel magnetic, like fate, like finally coming home. But that magnetism isn't love yet. It's recognition. Your nervous system saying, yes, I know this pain. Let's do it again. The person across from you isn't the problem. The imago is. The real trap is believing you're chasing them when you're actually chasing a feeling you learned to call safety. Before you commit to anyone, notice who you're drawn to and ask what role they're playing in your old family story. That single question can separate real connection from a beautiful, recursive trap. Repetition compulsion in partners. You keep choosing the same person wearing different faces. A partner who withholds affection until you prove yourself. A partner who's charming in public but cold at home. A partner who makes you chase them while they stay just out of reach. You swear this time will be different, but 3 months in, you recognize the script. That's not bad luck. That's your nervous system recruiting what feels familiar, even if familiar hurt you before. Repetition compulsion is the psychological engine that drives you toward the same dynamic again and again because unresolved pain has unfinished business. Your brain thinks if you just try harder, love more convincingly, understand them better, you can finally win the outcome you didn't get the first time. But here's what makes this sticky. The familiar ache actually feels like love. Real connection feels strange, stable, not desperate. So you mistake the absence of butterflies for the absence of chemistry. You mistake safety for boredom. Your attraction system is literally wired to recognize that old pattern as home, even when home was a place that made you small. The thing nobody tells you is that healing the compulsion isn't about willpower or better judgment. It's about recognizing the pattern while it's still small, before months of hope and effort lock you in. When someone makes you feel like you have to earn basic kindness, that's not romance. That's a reenactment, and you deserve to know the difference before you give years to a script you already know ends the same way. Intermittent reinforcement in romance. You text someone you like and they reply in 2 minutes, nothing special. Then the next time they reply 3 hours later, and suddenly you're checking your phone every 30 seconds. The pattern is not the speed, it's the unpredictability. Your brain doesn't reward consistency. It rewards the surprise, the uncertainty, the not knowing whether this time will be the fast reply or the slow one. Slot machines work exactly this way, and that person who ghosts you for a week then sends a perfect message keeps you more locked in than someone reliable ever could. The dopamine hit comes not from the contact itself, but from the surprise of it. When you know exactly when to expect something, your brain stops firing. When you don't, it stays alert, hungry, checking. Romance naturally runs on intermittent reinforcement in the early stages because nobody is available all the time. But some people, whether intentionally or by temperament, weaponize this. They become inconsistent on purpose. Texts every day, then silence. Plans made and broken. Promises kept and forgotten. Your nervous system learns the pattern is random, so it stays hypervigilant, always hoping the next moment is the one where they come through. You confuse that constant low-level anxiety with passion, mistake the ache for love. They stay in your head not because they're good to you, but because your brain is still chasing the reward it almost got. The antidote isn't willpower or discipline. It's recognizing that phone-checking itch, that relief flooding in when they appear, and asking whether you'd feel this same pull about someone who actually showed up consistently and reliably. Usually the answer is no. And that answer matters more than you think. Ambiguity and rumination loops. You text someone you're interested in. They reply 3 hours later with, okay, just that. No emoji, no warmth, no second sentence. Your brain opens a file it didn't know existed and starts running scenarios. Were they annoyed? Are they losing interest? Did you say something weird in the last conversation? You reread your message 5 times. By the third reread, the text itself has stopped mattering. You're chasing the feeling of not knowing. Ambiguity doesn't sit still in our minds. It breeds. One unanswered question becomes 10. Each one a small loop that pulls your attention back to the same moment. The same 3-letter word, like a record skipping. The worst part is how rational you sound doing it. You're not being paranoid. You're being thorough. You're considering possibilities. You're prepared. But what you're actually doing is manufacturing certainty by rehearsing the worst version of the story. Rumination loops lock tightest when someone matters to you because the stakes feel real. Their silence is your silence. Their slowness is your fault. And here's the hidden hinge. The ambiguity itself is often not the problem. People are slow, distracted, weird with texting, but your mind needs the story more than it needs the truth. The loop keeps spinning because stopping would mean sitting with not knowing. And that feeling is intolerable. If you catch yourself rereading, try this. Notice the moment the text becomes background and the story takes over. That's where the loop lives. Break it not by finding the answer, but by naming what you're actually afraid of. Sometimes that alone is enough to step back. The Zeigarnik effect on exes. You know that feeling when a song gets stuck in your head but never quite resolves? You keep humming it because your brain wants closure? Your mind does the exact same thing with people. The Zeigarnik effect says we remember unfinished tasks better than completed ones, and nowhere is that more brutal than with exes. A relationship that ended cleanly, with words spoken and goodbyes said, fades faster than one that just stopped. No explanation, no final conversation, just silence where you expected resolution. Your brain treats that silence like a plot hole, and it will keep trying to fill it for weeks or months, pulling you back to old messages and what-if scenarios at 2 a.m. The person who ghosted you lives in your head longer than the person who sat down and said they didn't love you anymore, even though the latter would have hurt more in the moment. Breakups where things feel unsaid, where the last interaction was an argument, or you never got to explain yourself, or they left a question hanging, these become the ones you can't stop thinking about. Your brain is just doing its job, trying to complete the narrative. But here is the trap. The more you keep thinking about them, the more you're not actually seeking closure. You're pattern searching, building versions of events that might never be true. The counterintuitive way forward is to give yourself the ending your brain craves, even if you write it alone. Say the words out loud, close the loop deliberately, because your mind won't stop trying until you do. Uncertainty reduction theory. Sit across from someone new and your brain starts firing questions like a detective the moment the conversation gets real. Do they actually like me? Are they someone I can trust? What's their deal when nobody's watching? That nervous, hungry feeling to know is not some glitch in your wiring. It's exactly how you're built. Humans are uncertainty reduction machines, and dating is where this drive shows up most naked and obvious. We chase people partly because they're mysterious, but we pursue them hard because we're desperately trying to solve the puzzle they represent. When someone is a question mark, every signal they send feels like a clue, and your brain treats figuring them out like a reward worth the effort. Here's where it gets sticky. The people we pursue most intensely are almost always the ones giving us just enough information to feel hooked, but not enough to feel safe. They text back slowly, warm one moment and cool the next, share something real, then retreat. Your nervous system reads this as, there's something important here to decode. And the act of decoding itself creates a hit of meaning that mimics love. You think you're chasing them, but you're actually chasing the satisfaction of turning an unknown into something solved. Then something strange happens. Once they become predictable, the electricity dies because the puzzle is cracked. The real danger is mistaking that hunger to understand someone with actual desire for who they are. Start noticing the difference between genuine fascination with their weirdness and values versus fascination with their inconsistency. One builds something real. The other just keeps you hunting for answers that were never meant to be found. Scarcity and perceived value. 3 days of silence from someone you like, and suddenly they're the only person worth thinking about. That's not love. That's scarcity working its ancient math on your nervous system, and you barely feel it happening. When something becomes hard to reach, your brain immediately recalculates its worth. It's evolutionary cargo from a time when scarce resources meant survival. Your ancestors who chased hard after rare things lived longer and passed genes that whisper, "Grab it now." Your dating brain never got the update. A person who replies slowly starts feeling special. Someone unavailable starts feeling like a prize. Someone completely wrong for you but takes weeks to respond suddenly feels like a puzzle worth solving. The cruelest part is you're not choosing this. Your body does it automatically before your thinking mind even shows up. You could meet someone warm, consistent, genuinely open, and feel nothing because the game seems too easy. Your nervous system runs an equation. Difficulty equals value. Scarcity makes the chase feel like desire. It makes uncertainty feel like depth. The person keeping you guessing doesn't feel unpredictable. They feel rare because your brain literally treats hard to get as worth more. There's a cold elegance to it. Desire follows the line of least availability, not best fit. The shift happens when you get honest with yourself in a quiet moment. Are you drawn to this person or drawn to the feeling of working for their attention? Are you chasing them or chasing the scarcity itself? That one question, asked when no one's listening, is often where the whole pattern breaks. Reactance and forbidden desire. Your ex is seeing someone new and your phone is in your hand at midnight. Your parents warned you away from that person, and now they're the only one you think about. That magnetic pull isn't love, and it isn't logic. It's reactance, the psychological squeeze that happens when your freedom feels threatened. Your brain interprets restriction as a loss and doubles down to reclaim what it thinks is slipping away. The forbidden fruit tastes sweeter, not because it actually is sweeter, but because wanting it feels like rebellion, like proof you still have agency. This mechanism cuts especially deep in dating because reactance hijacks your judgment entirely. You fall not for the person, but for the idea of them as an escape route or a middle finger to constraint. You're chasing the feeling of reclamation more than the actual human across from you. And here's the sting. The moment the restriction lifts, the spell often shatters. The moment they become available, the breakup settles, the parents accept them, the unavailable person finally texts back. You look around and wonder why you fought so hard, why you felt so certain. The person didn't transform. The pressure did. You can't always tell from the inside whether you're chasing someone or chasing the feeling of not being controlled. If you find yourself most drawn to people you can't have or most devoted after someone pulls away, pause and ask yourself what you'd actually want if nobody was disapproving and nobody was leaving. That answer is usually quieter than reactance allows and infinitely more honest. Social proof and mate copying. Watch what happens the moment someone notices their ex is happy with someone new. Suddenly, the ex becomes interesting again, not because they changed, but because someone else chose them. That signal rewires everything. We are not actually evaluating the person. We are reading the proof of concept another person's attraction stamps onto them. This is mate copying, and it runs deeper than vanity. Your brain treats mate choice like a shortcut. If someone you trust wants them, the math is already done. Saves you the messy work of figuring out if they are worth your time. Social proof is cognitive laziness wrapped in sound logic, and it works because statistically, people you respect often have good judgment. But it also works when the people approving are complete strangers, or when the person being chosen is actively wrong for you, and that is where the trap springs. Dating apps weaponize this ruthlessly. A profile with lots of matches gets more matches. A person who appears wanted becomes more wanted. You swipe on someone not because of who they are, but because the numbers suggest they are real estate in demand. In a room full of genuinely single people, the one already dating gets flirted with most. The brain shortcuts. If multiple people want them, there must be something I am missing. When you feel that sudden pull towards someone because others have chosen them, pause and ask what you actually know about them versus what the social proof is broadcasting. Strip away the audience and ask, do I like this person or do I like that they are liked? That distinction is everything, and catching it saves you from chasing ghosts. Pre-selection and desirability cues. Watch someone enter a coffee shop when they're already being watched. Phone buzzing, a text that makes them smile, someone's attention still hanging on them from the weekend. Suddenly, they look different to everyone else in the room. Not because they changed, because the room now knows someone else wants them. That invisible stamp of approval rewires how others see them, and it happens so fast your conscious mind barely registers it. You are drawn to people who are already chosen, already desired by someone else, because desire is contagious and scarcity is magnetic. A person who has been selected by others carries evidence of value that you don't have to verify yourself. The market has already voted. This is why your ex suddenly looked hotter once they started dating someone new, not because they transformed, because someone else's verdict made them feel real in a way your own attraction couldn't quite seal alone. The mechanism is survival smart. If multiple people want this person, there must be something worth wanting. But here's where it gets sticky for you. When you sense pre-selection, you're not just responding to their traits anymore, you're responding to the ghost of other people's desire. It can flip genuine interest into jealousy, quiet admiration into urgent need. And if you're the person without visible pre-selection, you're fighting an invisible competitor that doesn't even know you exist. The real trap is mistaking borrowed heat for your own heat, confusing someone else's vote with your compass. Real value does stand alone, but we rarely see it that way because we're all looking at the same crowd to tell us who's worth looking at. Status conferred desirability. You walk into a room and someone is already surrounded, not because they're the most beautiful or the funniest, but because others have decided they matter. Watch what happens next. Suddenly, the person who was invisible becomes magnetic. People lean in, eyes track them, the curiosity spreads like wildfire, and it has almost nothing to do with who they actually are. Your brain is constantly scanning for proof that someone is worth wanting, and status is that proof. It works like a shortcut. If others have chosen them, then maybe they're safe to want too. It's not rational, it's tribal. In a world where choice feels infinite and overwhelming, we use other people's attention as a filter. Someone with a waiting list becomes more interesting than someone always available. The person who is busy, in demand, already claimed by the social machinery, becomes the one you suddenly wonder about. Here's what makes it trickier. Status is conferred by context, not character. A person can be wildly desirable in one room and invisible in another. A surgeon at a hospital gala is status rich. That same surgeon alone at a coffee shop is just someone waiting in line. The seduction isn't in their qualities, it's in the story others are already telling about them. Your attraction gets hijacked by the narrative surrounding them, and you mistake borrowed status for actual chemistry. When you feel that pull towards someone, pause and ask, am I drawn to them or drawn to the fact that others seem to be? That tiny question can save you from chasing a mirror instead of a person. Costly signaling in courtship. Watch someone rearrange their whole weekend for a person they've just met or spend real money on a date when a cheaper option would do, and you're watching costly signaling in action. A calculated display your nervous system reads without you having to think about it. The core truth is simple. Real commitment shows up in what you sacrifice, not what you say. A person can tell you they care, but the person who learns your coffee order, who buys the thoughtful gift instead of the easy one, who shows up when it costs them something, that person is broadcasting something your brain registers as valuable. The cost is the message itself. When someone invests time or money or effort that they could spend elsewhere, it signals they believe you're worth the trade-off. And because it actually hurts a little, because it takes something away from them, it feels more honest than words. This is why grand gestures land harder than casual affection. A text can be copy-pasted, a surprise at midnight, a dinner cooked when they're exhausted, a promise kept when ghosting would have been easier. These are genuinely expensive. In the mating market, expense reads as security. The trap is real, though. You can start measuring love by the price tag or mistake big gestures for actual reliability. Someone can spend lavishly and still leave you, but when someone voluntarily pays a cost to be near you, they're telling you something true at a level words can't touch. You're worth more to them than comfort right now. That signal rarely lies for long. The handicap principle in display. There's a reason the most beautiful people sometimes seem to have the least to prove. A man drives an impractical car that costs half his annual salary. A woman picks clothes that show vulnerability instead of armor. A person admits openly that they cried last week. They're not being reckless. They're signaling something ancient and magnetic. I can afford to be honest because I have so much else going for me. This is the handicap principle, and it runs through attraction like a current you've probably felt but never named. The logic is counterintuitive but real. If someone can survive while carrying a visible weakness, flaw, or deliberate inefficiency, it proves they have reserves. A peacock's tail is objectively bad for survival. It's slow, cumbersome, makes escape harder, but that's exactly why it works. Only a bird with superior genes, health, and resources can afford to drag around such a liability. The tail is an honest signal because it's costly to fake. In dating, this plays out constantly. The person who admits they're bad with money then spends thoughtfully anyway. The one who won't pretend to like your favorite band, who wears their insecurity like a dare. You're drawn not to the perfection, you're drawn to the confidence it takes to be imperfect in front of you. Someone hiding flaws is either desperate or has nothing else worth showing. Someone showing you their real cost is saying, I don't need to perform, I'm this good. Watch who attracts you most. Often it's not the polished one, it's the ones who can actually afford to be real. Matching hypothesis of desirability. Walk into any coffee shop and watch who sits with whom. The ones actually leaning in, talking. You'll notice something almost uncomfortable. People tend to end up with others at roughly their own level of attractiveness, status, or social polish. It's not cruel, it's practical. The matching hypothesis says we don't aim for the most desirable person in the room. We aim for the most desirable person who will aim back. That asymmetry matters more than absolute ranking. You might think the person 2 leagues above you is stunning, but you also know, without anyone saying it, that they have options. So your brain does quiet math. Approach them and risk rejection, or go for someone closer to your own perceived value and improve your odds of reciprocation. Most of us choose the second without even knowing we're doing it. The strange thing is that this isn't failure or settling in the way we've been taught. It's actually how stable partnerships form. When both people feel roughly equally lucky to be with each other, there's less resentment, less scorekeeping, less of that slow corrosion that kills things over time. But social media has broken that feedback loop. You can spend 2 hours watching people so far outside your matching range that your brain forgets what realistic looks like. You start believing you should want what you can't have, then blame yourself for not having it. The fix isn't lowering your standards. It's getting honest about what your actual standards are versus what algorithms trained you to want. That clarity alone changes who you're willing to see. Mate, value, discrepancy, stress. You've felt it before. That low hum of anxiety when you're dating someone you know is objectively more desirable than you are. They turn heads, they have options. You know this, not because they've said it, but because you can feel the gap between what you bring and what they could get elsewhere. That gap, that quiet knowledge, doesn't just sit there. It rewires how you show up in the relationship. You become more accommodating. You monitor their mood shifts like a seismograph. You find yourself giving more, accepting less, staying a little smaller. This is mate value discrepancy stress, and it's one of the most predictable sources of relationship friction nobody talks about by name. When there's a real or perceived mismatch in what each of you could access on the open market, the lower value partner typically enters a state of quiet hypervigilance. You're scanning for proof they're losing interest. You're interpreting distance as a warning sign. You're negotiating with yourself about what to accept. Meanwhile, the higher value partner might not even realize they're holding power, or they might feel the weight of it without knowing where it comes from. The relationship doesn't feel equal because it isn't, not in the way your nervous system understands leverage. The real trap is that this imbalance doesn't have to be huge to matter. A small gap in attractiveness, income, or options can be enough to tip the dynamic. If you're feeling like you're managing someone rather than connecting with them, ask yourself what value you think you're defending against losing. That honest moment often cracks open the real negotiation. Authoritative mating drift. You meet someone at a coffee shop who reads the same book you do, same taste in music, same neighborhood, same education level. You think you've found your person, your match made in some cosmic sense. But here's what's actually happening. You've met someone who filtered through the exact same social sieve you did. You both ended up in that coffee shop, that neighborhood, that college, because you were already similar to begin with. This is authoritative mating drift, the quiet gravitational pull that keeps like with like, not because of deep compatibility, but because life naturally segregates us. We live near people like us. We work beside them. We join groups full of them. We don't choose similarity, we choose proximity, and similarity is baked into proximity. The trap isn't that you fall for someone familiar, it's that you mistake familiar for destiny. You think the alignment happened because you were meant to be together, when really, you were both just standing in the same room. Over time, this creates couples who look like copies of each other on paper, same politics, same income, same background, same neurosis. You feel understood because you're speaking the same learned language, but understanding someone similar isn't the same as understanding someone. It's more like recognizing your own reflection. The drift pulls couples toward homogeneity, which feels like safety until the moment it feels like suffocation. If you want real growth in a relationship, the kind that actually changes you, sometimes you have to notice where the current is pulling you and swim sideways instead. Contrast effect after browsing. Swipe through 50 profiles in 20 minutes and then meet someone genuinely kind in person, and something strange happens. That person feels somehow smaller than they should, not because they're actually less attractive or less interesting, but because your brain just finished comparing them to a curated highlight reel of human potential. You weren't just scrolling, you were calibrating your standards upward against an endless parade of optimized photos, witty bios, and the aesthetic equivalent of everyone's best day. Now, real life, a person with actual pores and uncertain lighting and a laugh that's not quite Instagram ready registers as a downgrade by comparison. This is the contrast effect, and dating apps have weaponized it. Your brain no longer evaluates the person in front of you on their own merits. It evaluates them relative to the last 10 people you just swiped past. Someone objectively attractive and kind might feel like a 5 out of 10, not because they are, but because you spent the last half hour looking at carefully filtered 6s and 7s and 8s. The frame shifted. Your expectations didn't just rise, they calcified around perfection that doesn't exist in the real world, because most of those profiles are performing, curating, editing. The deeper you browse, the worse it gets. A genuinely good person stops looking good because your baseline is now broken. When you notice yourself dismissing someone real in favor of the idea of someone better somewhere else in the app, that's the contrast effect doing its job. The move here is simple but not easy. Close the app and actually look at who's already there. Choice overload in dating apps. Swipe, swipe, swipe. In one evening, you've seen 40 faces you'll never see again, and somehow that feels like freedom until it feels like drowning. The app designer knows something about human nature that used to be hidden. Too many options don't make you happier, they make you paralyzed and perpetually shopping. When there are 5 single people in your neighborhood, you commit to one because the stakes are real. When there are 5,000, you keep swiping because the perfect person might be the next swipe or the one after that, or never. Each face becomes less real because the next one is always available. This is called the paradox of choice, and dating apps weaponize it. You're not comparing your date to reality anymore. You're comparing them to the infinite possibility in your pocket. She's intelligent and funny and kind. But what if the next match is intelligent and funny and kind and also into kayaking? What if the person after that exists at all? The insidious part is that apps have trained your brain to optimize rather than connect. You're shopping, not dating. And shopping never satisfies because satisfaction isn't the goal, replacement is. Studies show people in high-choice environments report lower satisfaction even when they make objectively better matches, because no choice feels final when 1,000 others are waiting. The next move isn't to delete the app, it's smaller. Set a swipe limit, match with someone, actually text them, have coffee, stay curious about what could happen if you stopped hunting for the upgrade. The grass looks greener because you haven't watered anything in a while. Paradox of choice fatigue. Swipe through 50 profiles and something weird happens. Instead of feeling liberated, you feel hollow. Every person blurs into every other person, and somehow that abundance makes it harder to want anyone at all. You know the feeling. Open the app, scroll for 10 minutes, close it without messaging, feel oddly drained. That's choice fatigue, and it rewires how you experience attraction. When options multiply beyond a certain threshold, your brain stops evaluating each person on their own merits and starts comparing them to an imaginary composite of all the others. No one feels special because everyone is interchangeable. The person who laughs at your jokes gets mentally stacked against 17 other profiles you swiped past, and none of them has to compete on actual compatibility, just on how they stack up abstractly. More choice theoretically means better odds, but psychologically it means less satisfaction. You become a curator instead of a dater, and that shift changes everything about how you commit. Here's what cuts deeper. The more options you have, the higher your standards climb. Not because you know yourself better, but because you're comparing against an invisible ideal forged from fragments of everyone else. Every person becomes a potential wrong choice rather than a possible right one. And when you finally do match with someone, that same fatigue makes you slower to invest, quicker to hunt for alternatives. You've trained your nervous system to treat commitment as premature when there are always more swipes left. The real move isn't willpower, it's limiting your options intentionally. Set a boundary with the app. Talk to fewer people more deeply. Let someone be enough before you've auditioned everyone else. Gamification of swiping. You know that feeling when you're scrolling through profiles and suddenly you can't stop, even though you know you should be asleep. That's not an accident, it's architecture. Apps like Tinder and Bumble borrow directly from slot machine design, turning attraction into a game loop. Swipe, get a hit, feel a dopamine spike, repeat. The variable reward schedule is deliberate. Sometimes you match right away. Sometimes it takes 50 swipes. That unpredictability is exactly what makes it stick harder than if you matched every single time. Your brain doesn't want certainty, it wants the possibility of something good just one swipe away. It's why you keep going even when you're tired or frustrated. Here's the twist. When dating becomes a game, the goal shifts. You're no longer looking for someone to build something with. You're playing to win points, to see who approves of you, to rack up matches. The swipe itself becomes the reward, not the connection that might follow. Some people play for hours and feel emptier after, not because they didn't match enough, but because they were never searching for a person. They were searching for a system to tell them they were desirable. The psychological trick is so clean, you barely notice it happening. The app wins either way. Whether you find someone or just feel addicted to trying, the platform gets your time and your data, your patterns of desire. If you're going to use these apps, at least know you're inside a machine designed to keep you swiping, not to get you out on a date. That awareness alone might change how you play. Comparison level for alternatives. You stay in a lukewarm relationship because you're terrified of being alone. Your friend leaves a genuinely good one because they believe something better is waiting. Same relationship quality, completely opposite decisions. The difference isn't the relationship itself, it's what each of you thinks is actually available to you. That invisible threshold is called your comparison level for alternatives, and it shapes whether you feel trapped or grateful in love. It's not about how good your current partner is on some objective scale. It's about how good they are compared to what you genuinely believe you could find instead. If you grew up watching your parents stay married despite constant fighting, your brain might file staying put as the only real option. If you watch someone leave and thrive, your comparison level shoots up. Past relationships matter too. If your exes were awful, a mediocre partner starts looking decent. If your exes were kind and thoughtful, a partner who forgets your birthday feels like settling. The trap is that your comparison level stays invisible to you. You might think you're leaving because someone is not right, when really you're leaving because you've watched another relationship and now your own feels smaller. Or you might stay because you genuinely can't imagine alternatives. The real catch: your alternatives aren't always realistic. You might romanticize being single or overestimate how easy it is to find someone better. Before your next move, get quiet and ask what you're actually comparing to. Is it real or a ghost story you've been telling yourself? Perceived alternatives and satisfaction. Your phone buzzes with a text from someone who used to interest you, and for a split second, you feel a little less trapped in your relationship. Not because that person is better, but because suddenly you remember you have options. Your satisfaction with your current partner just shifted, even though they did nothing different. What changed was the size of the world you imagined beyond it. Researchers call this perceived alternatives, and it's among the quietest saboteurs of long-term connection. The more viable choices you think you have, whether genuine options or just the phantom feeling that they exist somewhere, the less satisfied you become with what's in front of you. A partner's kindness starts to feel like a minimum. Their flaws get louder. You find yourself scanning conversations for proof that someone better is waiting. But here's what matters. This perception is almost never accurate. You're not comparing your current relationship to something real. You're comparing it to an imagined one, usually with all the boring parts edited out. The quiet danger is that this mental move absolutely changes how you show up. You become more critical, less generous, more likely to withdraw. And withdrawal creates distance, which then makes your alternatives feel even more real, a loop that feeds itself. The move that actually works is to consciously shrink your perceived world, not by isolating, but by stopping the mental shopping. Delete the app. Stop the what-if conversations. Turn your attention toward what you actually want to build. Satisfaction isn't about having no other options. It's about choosing to stop looking, settling versus maximizing partners. You meet someone good, not perfect. They're a bit more reserved than you'd ideally want, or their ambition doesn't quite match yours, or there's just something missing. But they're kind. They show up. They text back. And somewhere in your chest, a question blooms. Should I keep looking, or is this enough? That tension between settling and maximizing is where most people get stuck. And it's not actually about the person in front of you. It's about how your brain calculates scarcity versus possibility. Maximizers are wired to keep scanning for the better option, the upgrade, the partner who checks more boxes. It feels like self-respect. It's often just exhaustion wearing a rational mask. Satisficers, people who commit to good enough, report higher relationship satisfaction not because they dated worse people, but because they stopped comparing their partner to an imaginary ideal the moment they chose them. Here's what gets missed in both camps. Settling and maximizing aren't opposites. You can be a maximizer about what actually matters: kindness, reliability, how safe you feel, and a satisficer about everything else. The real trap isn't choosing your partner, it's keeping one eye on the exit, treating your relationship like a store with infinite inventory where the person across from you becomes a provisional choice instead of an actual commitment. That shift from evaluating to deciding, from perpetual scanning to presence, is where real partnership actually begins. Stop asking if they're the best. Ask if they're enough for the life you want to build, and whether you're willing to stop looking long enough to find out. Investment model of commitment. 2 years in, and the relationship is fine, stable, predictable, mostly good. Then someone new crosses your path and your nervous system wakes up in a way it hasn't in months. Your heart actually picks up speed. So why don't you leave? Psychologist Carol Rusbolt's investment model suggests the answer might feel uncomfortable. You might stay not because love is the strongest force anymore, but because leaving would cost you everything you've already poured in. Think about a stock portfolio you've been feeding for years. Even if the returns are mediocre, you hesitate to liquidate it all and start over because you'd lose not just money, but time, momentum, psychological certainty. The model tracks 3 forces pulling on you simultaneously: satisfaction, meaning how much you actually enjoy being with this person, alternatives, the realistic options available beyond this relationship, and investment size, how much of your life, shared friends, shared history, shared plans, maybe kids or a mortgage, would unravel if you walked away. Here's where it gets sharp. You could be staying not from genuine commitment, but from the sheer weight of extraction costs. Untangling a shared life, facing shame or loneliness, starting your romantic life from zero again, that pull might be stronger than any feeling, and the person across from you might be anchored by exactly the same calculus. You could both be trapped inside something that tastes less like love and more like resignation, held together less by desire and more by terror of beginning again. Learning to feel the difference between genuine commitment and entrenchment matters because one actually sustains you while the other erodes quietly from the inside. Sunk cost in relationships. You've been with someone for 3 years. The relationship hasn't worked for a while. You know this, they know this, but you stay. And when friends ask why, you hear yourself say things like, "I've already invested so much," or "I can't just throw away 3 years." That sentence is the sunk cost fallacy wearing a ring. You are deciding your future based on time you have already spent, not on whether the time ahead is worth living. Here's what makes this so sticky in dating. The longer you stay, the more it costs, which makes it harder to leave, which means you stay longer. Every month together starts to feel like a debt you're paying back to your past self, not a choice you're making for your future one. The cruel part is that the people trapped longest are often the ones who loved hardest because they have more to feel like they're wasting, so they optimize to avoid feeling like they failed, even though staying in the wrong person's arms is the real failure. The math is simple when you're not inside it. Whatever you spent before should have zero weight on what you decide today. Your time from this moment forward is real. The 3 years are not coming back regardless. So if you're using past investment as a reason to stay, not because you want them, not because the relationship is healing, but simply because you've already paid, that's the moment to notice you're no longer choosing love. You're grieving what you think you'll lose instead of building what you could gain. Sliding versus deciding transitions. You wake up one morning and realize you're planning a vacation together, sharing passwords, meeting their parents, and you have no memory of choosing any of it. This is sliding. It's what happens when a relationship moves forward, not because you both said yes, but because inertia did. The relationship didn't become serious. It just became harder to leave. You were sliding down a hill, and by the time you noticed you were moving, the slope felt too steep to climb back up. Deciding is different. It's the moment where someone actually looks at you and asks, or you both sit down and say it. Do we want this? Yes or no, knowing you could choose the other way. That moment feels scarier than sliding, which is why so many couples never have it. Sliding feels safe because it's not a real choice. If it falls apart, nobody technically chose it. But here's what matters. People who slide into commitment often slide out just as quietly. They never built an actual decision together, so when the easy path gets bumpy, leaving feels as natural as staying did. The couples who endure tend to have experienced real deciding moments, even if they were awkward or tense. You said yes. You both knew you could have said no. That changes how you weather the hard parts. So pay attention to whether you're building a life together or just occupying one while the current feels convenient. The difference is invisible until momentum shifts and you realize you're not sure if you're staying because you want to or because you never actually chose. The relationship escalator script. You've been climbing a staircase since childhood. Boy meets girl, they date, move in, get engaged, marry, buy a house, have kids, fade to black. You absorbed it so quietly, you stopped seeing it as a choice. Now, 3 months into someone new, you're running an invisible checklist without saying it aloud. Is this person spouse material? Are they heading somewhere real? Will they give me the life I'm supposed to have? Even if you've never talked about what you actually want, your nervous system is already deciding if they fit the next rung. The escalator feels like destiny rather than design, like you're not choosing, but obeying some force that entered you before you had words for it. You pick partners based on how well they match the future, not how much joy they create right now. You move in because that's what happens at year 2, not because you've genuinely figured out how you both live. You stay longer than you should because the script whispers, work on it before it permits, walk away. You measure your worth by how high you've climbed, past 30 without a ring, and something feels broken in you, not the blueprint itself. The real collision happens when two people are riding different escalators entirely. One person is picturing marriage and kids. The other wants a life partner, full stop, no children. Neither is wrong, but the script has no language for that conversation until someone is already hurt and resentful. Next time you feel that pull toward the next level, pause. Ask yourself, am I moving because I want this or because I'm obeying something handed to me before I could say no? That question can rewire everything. Sexual scripts and expectation. You walk into a scene you've seen 1,000 times before, in movies, in conversations, in the shape of other people's relationships. A man leans in. A woman waits. Somebody takes the lead. Somebody responds. You've never written this script consciously, but somehow you know exactly where you fit in it. That script is so invisible, it feels like nature. It feels like desire itself, but it's not. It's a template you absorbed so young you forgot you were learning it. Sexual scripts are the unspoken choreography most of us inherit without ever questioning whether the steps actually fit our bodies or our wants. They tell you what happens next, who moves first, what counts as sexy, what signals mean yes. They tell men to want more and women to want less. They tell you that real desire looks a certain way, sounds a certain way, ends a certain way. The trouble arrives the moment you meet someone whose script doesn't match yours. You're waiting for them to ask. They're waiting for you to signal. You think silence means no. They think it means maybe. One person feels like they're chasing, the other feels chased. Nobody's lying. You're just reading from different pages. The best conversations happen when you name the script out loud, when you say, I learned this, I'm not sure it fits anymore. What does this actually feel like for you? That vulnerability, that willingness to drop the choreography and ask what's really wanted, that's where genuine desire lives. Not in the template, in the actual person in front of you. Anxiety and reactive commitment. You meet someone and the first few weeks feel electric. Then they go quiet for a day, maybe 2, and suddenly you're checking your phone every 3 minutes, replaying conversations, wondering if you said something wrong. That spike of panic is your nervous system waking up and deciding the only cure is to lock this person down. Anxiety and commitment get tangled in ways most people never notice. In the way someone moves from casual to suddenly demanding exclusivity after their partner hints at a weekend away, or how a fight turns into urgent talk about the future, like cementing the relationship will stop the fear from coming back. Early attachment anxiety creates a gap between how close you feel and how close you believe you are. That gap is excruciating, so your brain offers a shortcut. If you can get them to commit, to promise they're not leaving, to text back faster, then the gap closes and the anxiety quiets, at least for a while. But a reactive commitment built on anxiety never solves the pattern. You're treating the symptom, not the wound. The person you rushed into promises with now carries the weight of managing your nervous system, which is impossibly heavy, and they can feel it. What shifts things is recognizing the moment the impulse appears, that sudden urgency to lock things down, to get reassurance, to move forward right now. Pause there. That is not genuine commitment. That is panic talking. Real commitment grows when you can sit in uncertainty without needing to eliminate it immediately. That's the harder path, but it's the one that actually holds. Self-expansion motivation. You meet someone who makes you feel like you're becoming more, not better, more. They know things you've never tried, move through the world differently, have tastes and skills and whole ways of thinking that crack open spaces in you that were closed. That pull you feel isn't just attraction to them as a person, it's attraction to the version of yourself that emerges in their orbit. Psychologists call this self-expansion motivation, and it might explain far more about who you chase than you realize. We are drawn to people who expand our sense of what's possible for ourselves. A partner who reads voraciously, one who moves their body in ways you never have, someone from a different world who teaches you to see familiar things anew. The magic isn't always about their charm or looks. It's that being with them literally makes you bigger. Your skills grow. Your confidence stretches. You try things alone later because they showed you it was possible. Here's where it gets complicated. Self-expansion can feel almost identical to love, but it runs on a completely different engine. You can be drawn to someone's expansiveness while remaining indifferent to who they actually are as a person. The excitement fades when the growth stops, when you've absorbed what they had to teach you and there's no new territory left to explore together. Real relationships need something steadier underneath that novelty, something that holds when you've stopped becoming and the learning curve flattens out. Before you commit to someone, sit with this carefully. Am I reaching for who I could become, or am I reaching for them? The answer matters more than you think. The Michelangelo phenomenon. There's a moment in early love when someone looks at you and sees a version of yourself you haven't quite met yet. A strength, a potential, a kind of brightness that's real but still forming. They believe in it before you do, and something shifts. You start becoming that person, not because they nagged you into it or tore you down until you had to rebuild, but because being seen that way actually changes how you move through the world. This is what Michelangelo meant when he talked about releasing the figure already trapped inside the marble. And in relationships, it works exactly that way. One partner becomes a genuine believer in the other's potential, not as a project to fix, but as a vision they're quietly holding and reflecting back. The magic is that the person doesn't feel diminished or chiseled away at. They feel expanded, recognized for who they're trying to become. But here's the trap. This only heals when the vision aligns with the person's own deepest sense of their potential. If your partner is molding you into their fantasy rather than helping you unfold into your own version of better, it stops being collaboration and starts feeling like clay on someone else's wheel. You'll know the difference by how it lands inside you. Does it feel like genuine expansion, like someone saw something true and helped you claim it? Or does it feel like you're being remade into someone else's ideal? The couples who thrive are those where both people hold that vision for each other without possession, where each one is both sculptor and marble, helping the other become more authentically themselves rather than more like an idea. Sternberg's triangular love. Right now, think about the person you're with or chasing and honestly answer 3 questions. Is there a spark? Do you actually know them? And are you both choosing to stay? Those 3 points are what Robert Sternberg mapped out decades ago, and they still cut through the noise better than anything else. Intimacy is the knowing part, their fears, their taste in old movies, how they fall apart and reassemble themselves. Passion is the electricity, that reaching for your phone first thing wanting that makes your nervous system hum. Commitment is the daily choice, the quiet, I'm picking you again tomorrow, that lives in decisions nobody celebrates. Most people chase passion alone and slap the word love on it, then wake up one day wondering why the spark evaporated and there's nothing underneath. Some relationships sit heavy with intimacy and commitment, but feel more like partnership than romance. Stable, comfortable, quietly numb. The rare thing happens when all 3 fire at once, what psychologists call consummate love, though it's not a permanent state so much as a frequency you tune into together. Here's the shift. Different relationships need different combinations at different times. Early dating thrives on passion and intimacy building side by side. Long-term love often leans harder into commitment and intimacy than the initial rush, knowing which shape you're actually inside, not the one you're pretending to live in, changes how you interpret the rough patches. A relationship low on passion but solid on intimacy and commitment isn't failing. It's just a different triangle. The real trap is expecting all 3 to stay maxed out forever, then resenting your partner when the electricity naturally softens into something quieter. Passionate to companionate shift. That moment, month 3, month 6, when the fireworks stop being constant and you realize you're just sitting together talking about grocery lists, most people treat it like a betrayal, like something died. But your nervous system finally believes the person is staying, so it stops flooding you with adrenaline and dopamine. The passionate phase was your brain saying, pay attention, this matters. The companionate phase is your brain saying, we're safe now. Both are real. Both matter. The trap is mistaking calm for boredom, stability for stagnation. You see a couple holding hands without talking and think they've lost it. You don't see the 10 years of trust underneath that quiet, the small agreements that stack like bricks over time. What kills companionate love isn't the absence of passion, it's the absence of choosing. Early on, you choose because chemicals and novelty flood your system. 3 years in, you have to choose because you decide the person is worth showing up for, even when the rush is gone and mystery fades. That choice, made 100 times in 100 small moments, is where real love actually lives. The risk is waiting for passion to return instead of building the intimacy that outlasts any chemical high. You can manufacture novelty and chase other people's fireworks, but you can't fake a decade of someone knowing exactly how you take your coffee and still thinking you're worth the work. If you're in that shift right now, it's not a sign to leave. It's a sign the experiment phase ended and the building phase began. The couples who make it understand that depth and loyalty are their own kind of fire, quieter and steadier, infinitely harder to fake. Erotic distance and desire. You know that feeling when someone pulls slightly away and suddenly you want them more? That's not an accident. It's how desire actually works. Absence doesn't just make the heart grow fonder, it makes the nervous system wake up. When there's enough space between you and someone, your brain has to imagine what they're thinking, what they want, what they might do. That gap becomes a screen for projection. You're not responding to who they are anymore. You're responding to the person you invented in the silence. The unknowable version always looks better than the real one. Early in attraction, erotic distance is almost built in. You don't know them yet, so mystery fills the room. But as closeness happens naturally, that friction flattens. The person becomes knowable, readable, and for some people that feels like the spark died when really it just transformed into something less flashy but more real. Comfort, trust, the boring good stuff that actually lasts. The people who chase distance over and over are often chasing that particular high. The dopamine rush of uncertainty, the eroticism of not knowing. They'll manufacture space through games, long absences, emotional unavailability, keeping you just far enough away to stay interesting. When you meet someone like that, their desire will feel intense and magnetic, but it's being fired by the distance, not by you. The moment you close the gap and become real and present, the intensity often cools. The hard part isn't blaming yourself, it's recognizing that their hunger was never about reaching you. It was about not quite reaching you. Desire needs uncertainty. Think about the person who calls you back in 3 days instead of 3 hours, or the one who sometimes doesn't text for a whole evening. You notice them more, don't you? Your mind spins a little. You check your phone. You construct small narratives about what they might be doing. And that spinning, that construction, that's not a bug in desire. It's the whole engine. Here's what kills passion faster than anything: perfect predictability. When you know exactly what someone will say, exactly when they'll reach out, exactly how they feel, the wanting machine shuts down. You've solved the puzzle. There's no more mystery to pull you forward. Desire isn't attraction plus certainty. It's attraction plus the specific heat of not knowing yet. This is why the beginning of something feels electric. You don't know if they like you back. You don't know what they're thinking. You don't know if this will work. That uncertainty isn't a flaw you're waiting to fix. It's the exact condition that makes your body light up and your attention snap toward them. The danger is mistaking this for love. You can become addicted to the uncertainty itself, chasing people who are unavailable or inconsistent, calling it passion when it's actually just the dopamine hit of a brain that's constantly being surprised. Real partnership requires certainty eventually. But if you kill the mystery too fast, by over-explaining yourself, by being always available, by removing all surprise, you're not building safety. You're building boredom. The trick is carrying a little mystery forward, even when things get real. Overfamiliarity dampens eroticism. There is a particular kind of flatness that settles into long-term relationships. Not coldness exactly, but a sameness that makes desire quieter. You know how your partner will move before they move. You can finish their sentences. You've seen them at their worst and best, hungover and sick, and something shifts when all mystery evaporates. Psychologists call this the Coolidge effect, and it operates like a dimmer switch on attraction. Novelty and eroticism are deeply linked. Your nervous system lights up when you don't quite know what comes next, when there's unpredictability, when you have to pay attention. But when you've mapped every response, every touch, every reaction, your brain stops sending that alert signal. It's not that you stopped loving them. It's that your arousal system needs friction, surprise, a little bit of the unknown to activate. This is why couples who travel together, try new things, or build in genuine unpredictability often report that their sex life stays more alive. It's also why the honeymoon phase is short. Your partner is genuinely a stranger for those first months, and that strangeness creates electricity. The trap is thinking this fade is inevitable, a sign that passion was never real, but it's usually just neurochemistry and psychology colliding with routine. The couple who stays curious about each other, who asks questions they haven't asked, who surprises, who maintains a small edge of mystery, is often the couple that stays desire. Not romance, not comfort, but actual erotic charge. The work is to keep creating moments where you're not completely predictable to each other. The fantasy bond and stagnation. There's a moment in most long-term relationships when the person you're with stops becoming someone you're pursuing and starts becoming someone you're just there with. The spark doesn't die all at once. It dissolves slowly, like a film scene nobody notices until it's already changed. This is what psychologists call the fantasy bond, when the security of the relationship itself replaces genuine connection as the thing you're protecting. You stop trying. They stop trying. Suddenly, you're both living parallel lives under the same roof, mistaking habit for commitment. The trap is that it feels safe. After years of vulnerability, risk, and the exhaustion of real intimacy, a relationship that runs on autopilot feels like rest. You've stopped fighting, stopped reaching, stopped being interested in who they're becoming because you already have a locked story about who they are. They become a fixture like furniture, functional, familiar, but not alive to you anymore. The sex fades, the conversations narrow. You start feeling lonely while lying next to them, which is one of the cruelest tricks a relationship can pull because you're not actually alone. You're just not seeing the person beside you. The stagnation happens not because love left, but because you both agreed, without saying it, to stop reaching. You swap the fragile work of staying connected for the false comfort of staying put. The real question isn't whether you love them anymore. It's whether you're willing to fall out of the fantasy and back into the work of actually knowing them. That's where the choice lives. Differentiation of self. There's a type of person who stays calm when their partner spirals. Not cold, not detached, just steady. They can hear panic without catching it like a virus, disagree without needing to convince or defend, even sit with anger without absorbing it as their job to fix. That steadiness is differentiation, and it rewires who you attract and how long you last. Most of us are fused with our partners emotionally. Their mood becomes your mood. Their crisis becomes your emergency. Their doubt about you triggers a full-body scramble to prove yourself or leave first. You operate from a place of, we are one. So when they hurt, you hurt. When they pull away, you panic. Differentiation means you have a solid sense of who you are, separate from them. You know your own values, timeline, limits. You can say no without guilt spiraling, be wrong without collapsing, sit with their sadness without it becoming your fault to repair. Your nervous system doesn't depend on their mood for permission to be okay. Here's what matters for dating. People with strong differentiation are magnetic. Not because they're cold or selfish, but because they don't leak need. They're not scanning your face for approval to feel safe, not building their entire worth on whether you text back. That groundedness signals safety to healthier partners and feels like a challenge to people addicted to chaos or control. If you catch yourself shape-shifting constantly, managing their emotions while collapsing your own, you're fused. Start small. Notice where your opinion ends and theirs begins. That gap is where differentiation lives. Codependent role complementarity. You've probably noticed how some couples work like a puzzle where the jagged edges fit perfectly. One person lives to solve problems, the other needs rescuing. One is the emotional caretaker, the other is emotionally unavailable. One sacrifices endlessly, the other takes without guilt. It feels like they complete each other. What's actually happening is darker. They're both getting something they crave, and neither one wants to admit what it costs. This is role complementarity, and it's the reason some dysfunctional partnerships feel more stable than healthy ones. When you're the helper, you get identity, purpose, and the illusion of control. If you fix them hard enough, maybe you won't have to feel your own emptiness. When you're the one being helped, you get permission to stay stuck, avoid responsibility, and never grow up. Both roles are comfortable lies, and they reinforce each other perfectly, tightening the knot with every gesture of care or surrender. The problem arrives quietly. As time passes, one person resents the other for not changing, while the other resents being pressured to change. The roles that seemed complementary start to feel like cages, like a puzzle that no longer fits the hand trying to hold it. And because both people have built their entire identity around their half of the puzzle, leaving feels like losing yourself completely. The way out is messier than staying. It means one person has to change while the other learns to tolerate discomfort instead of fixing it. Neither person wants that, which is why these pairs often stay locked together for years, calling it love, the rescuer fantasy and fixing. You meet someone who's struggling, not in a way that bores you, in a way that makes you feel necessary. They're bright but lost, talented but held back, kind but wounded by the world, and suddenly you're not just dating them. You're the person who understands. You're the one who can help them see their own worth. It feels like love, but it tastes like purpose, and that's the trap. The rescuer fantasy isn't about them. It's about the version of yourself you get to be when you're needed. You become competent, wise, patient. You matter. Here's what happens next. You pour into them. You listen to the same story 3 times a week. You defend them to your friends. You make excuses. You become the emotional scaffolding they've stopped building for themselves. And then one of 2 things occurs. Either they actually start healing, which means they need you less and you feel abandoned by the very person you saved, or they don't heal and you exhaust yourself trying to want hard enough for both of you. Both endings feel like failure because you were never actually solving for them. You were solving for how you needed to feel. The quiet move here is to notice when attraction arrives wrapped in the word potential. Not the potential of who they are, but who you think they could become if you loved them right. That's not romance. That's a project. And people aren't projects. They're people. The ones worth keeping aren't the ones who need saving. They're the ones who are already saving themselves. Pursuer-distancer dynamic. You know that feeling when you reach out and someone pulls away, so you reach harder and they pull further until you're both trapped in a dance nobody chose. That is the pursuer-distancer pattern, and it may be the most reliable way 2 people can love each other and still feel completely alone. The pursuer usually starts from a real place. They want closeness, reassurance, a sign that the other person is still there. So they text more, ask for plans, want to talk about feelings. But the distancer experiences that as pressure. They feel suffocated, crowded, inspected. Their instinct is to create space, ignore a text, cancel plans, go quiet. And here is where the trap snaps shut. The pursuer reads that distance as rejection, so they pursue harder. The distancer reads that harder pursuit as proof they were right to need space, so they distance more. Both of them are reacting to the other's behavior, not their actual feelings, and the cycle spins tighter. What makes this vicious is that both partners often believe they are the one being wronged. The pursuer thinks, I just want to be close to you, and the distancer thinks, I just need room to breathe. Both are true. Neither is listening. If you find yourself in this pattern, and most of us do at least once, the move is to break the reflex. The pursuer needs to sit with their own fear of abandonment instead of outsourcing it to the other person. The distancer needs to practice moving toward discomfort instead of away from it. Neither will feel natural, but that is exactly why it works. Demand, withdraw, escalation. You say something matters to you. Your partner goes quiet, maybe leaves the room. So you follow. You raise your voice a little, they raise theirs back or shut down harder. Now you're both trapped in a loop that feels impossible to break, and neither of you started it on purpose. This is demand withdrawal, and it lives in most relationships that slowly turn cold. One person wants closeness, conversation, or reassurance, so they push, they demand. The other person feels crowded or criticized, so they retreat. But retreating makes the first person panic, so they push harder. Withdrawing makes the second person feel more trapped, so they pull away further. The cycle feeds itself with no effort from either of you. What sticks the hardest is that both people feel like the other one started it. The pursuer thinks, I wouldn't be upset if they just talked to me. The withdrawer thinks, I wouldn't shut down if they didn't attack me. You're both right. You're also both wrong. Neither role is chosen consciously at the start. It's usually learned from early relationships or wired into your nervous system as a safety strategy. The trap is that the pattern runs faster than your intention to stop it. But here's what actually works. Someone has to break it when you're both still calm, not mid-escalation. Name it together, not as blame, but as simple recognition. This is happening again. Neither of us wants this. The withdrawer stays present even when flooded. The pursuer softens their ask into something that doesn't sound like an attack. It's not natural. It feels strange at first, and it's the only thing that actually works because you are interrupting the nervous system before the old groove takes over. Bids for connection. A text lands on your phone, a meme, a question about your day, a photo of their coffee, nothing that shakes the earth. And right then, without thinking about it, you're already deciding, respond warmly and real, or like it and ghost, or leave it hanging. That small move you make or don't make is what researchers call a bid for connection, and Gottman, the man who watches marriages the way a physicist watches atoms, found it predicts whether couples stay or drift. The ones who turn toward each other's bids stay. The ones who turn away, even gently, don't. But here's the trap most people fall into. You believe the big moments are what matter. The anniversaries, the fights, the grand declarations, the romantic gestures. Your relationship isn't built there, though. It's built in the tiny spaces you almost miss. The bid sent, the choice to answer it or not. Your person feels that choice the way you feel temperature, not as one cold moment, but as a pattern accumulating over weeks and months. Each small turn adds up. They become either the texture of trust or the texture of loneliness, sometimes both at once. They decide whether your person feels seen or invisible, wanted or tolerated. The weight of a relationship isn't in the climactic scenes, it's in these whispers. When you catch yourself about to leave a bid hanging, pause first. What does it cost to turn toward it? Usually, almost nothing. A few seconds, a real word, your attention. What does it cost to turn away? Eventually, everything. Turning toward versus away. You're lying in bed next to someone. They mention something that hurt them, a comment you made, a way you looked at them. Your nervous system lights up, fight or flee, right? But there's a third option that most people never notice. You can turn toward them instead. Researcher John Gottman spent decades watching couples and found that this single move, turning toward distress rather than away from it, predicted everything. Couples who turned toward each other's bids for connection, even small ones, stayed together. Couples who turned away, even if they weren't fighting, usually didn't. When your partner says something vulnerable and you reach for your phone, you're turning away. When they ask how your day was and you give a one-word answer because you're tired, you're turning away. When they tell a story and you interrupt with your own, you're turning away, even though you thought you were connecting. The pull away feels natural when you're overwhelmed or defended. Your nervous system wants to manage its own survival, not tend to someone else's wound. But notice what happens over weeks and months. Every small turn away accumulates like compound interest in reverse. It's not about perfection, it's about noticing the moment and choosing, even once a day, to turn toward instead. A real question instead of a dismissal. A hand on their arm instead of scrolling silence. A pause instead of a rebuttal. That habit, built small and repeated, becomes the difference between a relationship that erodes quietly and one that actually holds. Repair attempts under conflict. You're mid-argument and your partner suddenly cracks a joke. You don't laugh. They touch your arm softly. You pull away. What just happened and what you rejected was a repair attempt, and how you handle those moments predicts whether your relationship survives hard seasons better than almost anything else. Repair attempts are the small gestures, humor, apologies, or redirects your partner throws across the table when things heat up, and most of us miss them entirely because we're locked in the fight, too flooded to notice we're being offered a way out. The research is stark. Couples where both partners recognize and accept repair bids, even small, awkward ones, stay together. Couples where repair attempts die in the water tend not to. Here's what matters. Repair isn't about one grand apology or perfect words. It's about whether you're willing to meet a softening when it comes, even if it comes sideways or imperfectly. Your nervous system is flooded. Your amygdala is running the show, and they're trying anyway. When you reject that, when you stay sharp, cold, or dismissive, you're not winning the argument. You're training them to stop reaching. The trap is believing repair only happens when someone says sorry. Sometimes it's a hand offered, a question asked gently, a shift in tone, or just stopping the list of grievances to acknowledge one thing they got right. It can look clumsy, arrive at the wrong moment, feel insufficient. Next fight you have, slow down enough to notice if they're trying to build a bridge back to you. And if they are, take it. That small yes might be worth more than any victory in the moment. The positive to negative ratio. There's a moment in most relationships where you realize you're keeping score. Not consciously, but your nervous system is. One kind word versus one dismissive comment. A planned date versus a canceled one. A laugh together versus an argument that left you cold. Your brain is running a ratio, and the math gets strange because negative experiences weigh more than positive ones. A psychologist named John Gottman spent decades watching couples and discovered something almost brutal. In a healthy relationship, you need about 5 positive interactions for every one negative. 5 to 1, not equal, not even close. That's because our threat detection system, the part that kept ancestors alive, still runs the show. A single unkind word can undo 5 good ones. A moment of feeling unseen can cancel out weeks of small kindnesses. This is why someone can say, "I love you" every day, and you still feel abandoned after one night when they're distant. The negative doesn't just register, it overwrites. The trap is thinking you can earn back balance with grand gestures or more words. You can't. What shifts the ratio is consistency in the small things. Noticing when your partner tries, responding when they reach out, staying present even when the attraction feels flat. It's not romance, it's the actual math of belonging. If you're counting now, if things feel heavier than they should, you might already be below that ratio. That's worth knowing. Not as a scorecard, but as a signal that something needs to shift before the negative becomes the dominant story you tell about this person. Flooding and physiological arousal. Your heart is racing, palms sweating. The person you love just said something that landed wrong, and suddenly your whole nervous system thinks it's under attack. You want to respond thoughtfully, but your body has other plans. That shutdown, that hot blur where words disappear, that's flooding, and it's not weakness or drama. It's your amygdala hijacking your prefrontal cortex because it decided this is a threat. When physiological arousal spikes past a certain threshold, the rational part of your brain literally goes offline. You're not choosing to clam up or lash out. Your body is choosing for you. Neuroscientist John Gottman found that men's heart rates hit this flooding threshold around 100 beats per minute. And from that point forward, every word from their partner starts to sound like an attack. The body can't tell the difference between a predator and a disappointed look anymore. Flooding happens fast and invisibly. Your person might not even realize you've left the conversation mentally. They see silence or anger and assume stonewalling, not knowing you literally cannot access the words to explain yourself. The longer you stay flooded, the more your nervous system encodes this interaction as dangerous, making the next fight harder to navigate. Flooding isn't a character flaw you can shame away. It's a biological ceiling, and you hit it before you know you're there. The move isn't to white-knuckle through it or convince yourself to stay. If you feel it starting, name it quietly. I'm overwhelmed right now. Then step away for 20 minutes, not to punish, not to win, but to let your body come back online. It's the smallest reset that changes everything. The 4 horsemen of contempt. You know that moment when someone rolls their eyes at something you just said? Not irritation, something colder, something that lands like dismissal. That eye roll is the first horseman, and it's the canary in the coal mine of a dying relationship. Researcher John Gottman spent decades watching couples argue and found that contempt, genuine disdain, was the single strongest predictor of breakup. But contempt doesn't walk in alone. It arrives with 3 traveling companions: criticism that attacks character instead of behavior, defensiveness that makes you counterattack instead of listen, and stonewalling, that silent wall that refused conversation. Watch them show up in sequence, and you'll see the exact architecture of how a relationship collapses. Your partner critiques something you did. You immediately defend yourself instead of hearing them. They feel unheard, so they pull back, turning cold. The contempt settles in like fog. Here's what most people miss. These 4 don't need to be screaming fights. They're often quiet. A tone shift, an absence of softness. The thing that kills most relationships isn't passion curdling into rage. It's the slow rot of being dismissed, the way you stop trying to understand each other and start collecting evidence for why the other person is wrong. Once contempt takes root, repair becomes exponentially harder because you're no longer arguing about the issue. You're arguing about whether the other person is worth the effort at all. If you catch yourself in that eye-rolling space, that's your signal to pause and ask, am I fighting the person or the problem? That question, asked honestly, might buy you time before the horsemen fully arrive. Negative sentiment override. You bring your partner flowers on a Wednesday, nothing special, just because. They glance at the bouquet and ask if you're doing something wrong, if you're guilty of something. In that moment, the flowers didn't land as affection. They landed as proof that something is broken. Your partner's brain has become so saturated with hurt or suspicion that anything good gets reinterpreted through a lens of doubt. The flowers become suspicious. The good morning text becomes performance. Kindness becomes camouflage. It usually starts quietly: a betrayal, a broken promise, a pattern of felt neglect. And then the brain learns to protect itself by assuming the worst. Your partner stops giving your actions the benefit of the doubt. They stop giving you credit. Over time, it becomes their default setting, not just toward you, but toward the whole relationship. The trap deepens when you try harder to prove you've changed, because every effort now reads as manipulation to someone in override mode. They're not interpreting your behavior, they're testing it against a story already written, checking the details for lies instead of looking for truth. Flowers, promises, and perfect dates won't fix it alone. You need direct, honest conversation about the original wound, not another gesture that will be filtered through suspicion and doubt. If you're the one doing the overriding, the move is smaller but harder. Pause and ask yourself what you're actually seeing versus what you're afraid of. That gap between the two is where healing lives, and it only closes when both of you are willing to look at it together instead of performing across it, letting fear run the show. Attribution style in couples. Your partner forgets to text you back all day. In your mind, they're pulling away, don't care enough. 3 hours later, traffic, phone died, work chaos. You feel foolish, but something lingers. The story you told yourself felt true while you believed it. That gap between what happened and what you decided it meant is attribution style, and it shapes whether couples fight constantly or stay curious about each other instead. Attribution style is simply how you explain things. When your person is distant, do you think they're angry at you, stressed, or that you did something wrong? When they're late, is it carelessness or bad traffic or proof they don't respect your time? Your brain defaults to one pattern, and once it picks a story, it collects evidence that proves it true. You start noticing every late arrival, every short answer, every missed call. Confirmation bias stitches the narrative into something that feels less like a guess and more like proof. Here's what separates couples that last from those who don't. Partners with healthier attribution styles assume good intent first. They ask instead of accusing. They leave room for context and complexity. That doesn't mean swallowing disrespect. It means the first interpretation isn't "you don't love me," it's "something's off. Let me find out what." When both people do that, misunderstandings stay small and fixable. When one or both are always reading betrayal into ambiguity, every small thing becomes another brick in the wall of resentment. The habit hardens fast. After a while, even good moments feel like exceptions to the real story you've already decided is true. Fundamental attribution error in dating. He doesn't text back, your stomach drops, he's losing interest, he doesn't care, he's probably talking to someone else. By the time you see him 3 days later, you've built a whole narrative about who he is. Selfish, emotionally unavailable, the kind of guy who toys with people. Then he explains. His phone died, work exploded, his dad had a health scare. The story collapses, but not quite. There's always a small voice saying maybe he's just making excuses, and this is who he really is underneath. That voice is the fundamental attribution error at work. When someone we care about does something that hurts or confuses us, our brain defaults to blaming their character instead of their circumstances. You assume intentionality, personality, stable traits. What you rarely do first is ask what was actually happening in their world. And the cruel irony, when you mess up with someone, you do the exact opposite. You explain your context. You list your pressures. You're certain they should understand. This gap, where you blame his personality but excuse your own circumstances, is one of the stickiest traps in early dating. It makes you read neutral behavior as rejection, kindness as manipulation, silence as proof of who someone truly is. The antidote isn't to become naive or excuse genuine bad behavior. It's to build a small habit. Pause before you write that character sketch and ask what you don't know about their day, their stress, their actual capacity right now, what might be invisible to you from the outside. That one question can stop you from burning something good before it even starts, and it keeps you honest about the stories you tell yourself in the dark. Actor-observer asymmetry. He canceled again. You've been seeing him for 3 months, and he just texted that work got in the way. Your mind assembles a story in 2 seconds. He's losing interest, doesn't prioritize you. That's who he is. Meanwhile, in his apartment, he's thinking about the actual emergency at the office, the deadline he can't move, the email chain that exploded an hour ago, the fact that his boss basically cornered him. He's not thinking about his character. He's thinking about circumstances. This gap is where most dating conflicts hide. When you do something, you know the context, the bad day, the stress, the thing you didn't mention. You forgive yourself. When someone else does the same thing, you see a personality flaw. You are the observer of their behavior and the actor in your own. The observer assigns blame to who they are. The actor blames what happened around them. The cruel part is this: the more often someone cancels or disappoints, the more your brain locks onto their character as evidence. Not a person having hard weeks, a person who is unreliable, a person who doesn't care. That story hardens. Pretty soon, you're not reacting to what they do. You're reacting to who you've decided they are. The move is not to ignore flakiness. It's to stay curious about the gap between their explanation and your story. Ask what was actually happening for them that day, then check if you would do the same thing in their shoes. That tiny shift from judge to investigator can be the difference between a breakup and understanding, triangulation and jealousy, induction. You've probably felt it. A small comment slips into conversation and your chest tightens. Your partner mentions how funny someone else is or how thoughtful a friend became lately, and suddenly you're not quite sure where you stand. That calculated ambiguity is triangulation, and it's one of the slyer ways people keep attraction alive by stoking just enough doubt. The person doing it might not even know they're doing it. Sometimes it's conscious strategy. Either way, the mechanism is ancient. Scarcity breeds hunger. When you feel like you might lose someone, your brain stops taking them for granted. You pay closer attention. You try harder. The jealousy induction works because it shifts you from comfort into competition mode. Your nervous system doesn't want to lose, it wants to win. What makes this pattern so sticky in dating is that it often works in the short term. The jealous surge can feel like passion, like proof the relationship matters. You feel more alive. You text back faster. But here's what happens when it becomes the rhythm. Constant low-level triangulation erodes trust. You stop feeling safe around the person. You start keeping score of every mention, every comparison, wondering if you're with someone who actually values you or someone who just enjoys being chased, who needs the uncertainty to feel desired. The quiet move: watch yourself for it too. Notice if you're mentioning another person's interest to make your partner nervous. Notice if you're withholding affection to create scarcity. The people who need triangulation to stay interested are usually the ones least equipped to build something that actually lasts. Jealousy as mate guarding. You've probably felt that hot spike the moment your person laughs a little too easily at someone else's joke. Your body doesn't care that nothing has actually happened. It's already running the defense protocol. That's jealousy operating as what biologists and psychologists call mate guarding, a fear-based surveillance system designed to keep your attachment secure. The intensity isn't random or purely rational. It's tuned to perceived threat, and threat is always personal. If your partner finds someone more attractive, funnier, or more successful, that isn't an abstract problem. It feels like a vote against you, a kind of slow replacement. And here's the hook. Jealousy works precisely because it makes you do something. It tightens your attention, sharpens your monitoring, maybe makes you a little more attentive or a little more controlling. That's the guard at work. The real trouble is that mate guarding often backfires in ways you don't see coming. When jealousy drives behavior, checking phones, dropping comments about someone's appearance, pulling away when your person gets close to others, it creates distance instead of security. The person being guarded feels watched, mistrusted, less free. Over time, that actually increases the risk of what you were trying to prevent. Your partner doesn't leave because someone else is objectively better. They leave because being around you stopped feeling like home. The reframe isn't to kill the jealousy. It's too old and deep for that. Instead, notice when it fires, sit with the fear underneath it, and ask honestly if monitoring is actually keeping them close or slowly pushing them away. Sexual versus emotional jealousy. Ask a man if it bothers him more when his partner sleeps with someone else or falls in love with them, and you'll often get a different answer than if you ask a woman the same thing. This gap isn't moral. It's biological hardwiring colliding with what we actually value. Men, on average, report more distress about sexual infidelity. Women more often crumble over emotional betrayal, and that divide tells you something wild about how we're built to protect what matters most. The theory goes back to survival and paternity. A man's genetic legacy depends on knowing his children are his. Sexual betrayal is the fast track to that uncertainty. It happens in an afternoon, and it's done. Emotional infidelity is slower, less conclusive, easier to rationalize away. For women, the math was different. A partner who emotionally checked out might leave, might stop providing, might redirect resources elsewhere. That's the deeper threat. But here's what actually matters. These aren't fixed rules, they're just averages that break constantly. Some women would torch everything over a single sexual slip. Some men crumble over emotional distance, but not physical acts. Plenty of people care equally about both or flip the order entirely. The real trap is assuming your jealousy pattern is universal, or worse, that the person triggering it shares the same one. You can be devastated by emotional distance while your partner thinks they've committed nothing if there was no sex. That mismatch, where two people are protecting different things, is where couples actually derail. Before you judge the shape of someone's fear, ask what they're actually afraid of losing. Illusory transparency in flirting. You're sitting across from someone you like, certain they can see straight through you, your nervousness, your interest, those carefully placed jokes all broadcasting in neon. You think your smile looks desperate. You think your laugh sounds forced. You think leaning in screams, "I want this." But here's the thing, they probably have no idea. What feels deafening inside your head is nearly silent to everyone else. This is illusory transparency, and it runs the entire show in flirting. Your internal experience, the anxiety, the hope, The constant self-consciousness feels so loud and urgent that invisibility seems impossible, except your listener isn't living in your head. They're reading a smile, a tone, maybe some eye contact, zero access to that running commentary of doubt and self-judgment. So they're not seeing what you believe you're broadcasting, and it cuts both ways, which is where it gets quietly dangerous. When someone flirts with you, you're reading far less certainty or real interest than they're actually feeling. They think they're being obvious. They think they're taking an actual risk, but you're parsing that same smile for hidden signals, and those signals stay stubbornly ambiguous. So people hold back, waiting for proof that seems unmistakable. But that proof almost never comes because the other person is drowning in the exact same illusion. The trap isn't that you need to perform louder or clearer. It's recognizing that ambiguity lives on both sides of every exchange, and sometimes the only language that cuts through is a small, genuine risk. The kind that terrifies you precisely because they might actually see it. The paradox is almost cruel. The moment you stop trying to be obvious is often the moment you actually become visible. Spotlight effect on rejection. You've texted someone you like and they haven't replied in 2 hours. In your head, that silence has already become a story. They're reading it to friends, rolling their eyes, deciding you're desperate. The notification hasn't come back yet, but somehow you're already the punchline in a conversation that may never happen. The spotlight effect is the belief that everyone is watching you way more closely than they actually are. And when rejection enters the picture, that distortion gets sharper because your threat detection system flips on. Suddenly, you're not just noticeable. You're noticeably flawed, and everyone sees it. But here's what's almost always true. That person is not telling your story to anyone. They're thinking about their own day, their own worries, their own inbox. Their silence doesn't mean they're cataloging your mistakes. It means their phone is across the room, or they're tired, or they haven't thought about you at all. And if they do reject you outright, the embarrassment you feel lives almost entirely inside your own mind. The people you're convinced are judging you have mostly forgotten the moment by tomorrow. Your coworkers who witnessed that awkward conversation, your friends who saw you get left on red, they're not replaying it at night the way you are. This matters because rejection already hurts, and when you layer the spotlight effect on top of it, you're punishing yourself twice. Once for the actual no, and again for the imagined audience. Catching that thought in real time, am I assuming they're thinking about me more than they actually are, can shrink the pain down to something real instead of something monstrous. Fear of rejection overestimated. You've spent more mental energy catastrophizing a text message than actually sending it. That hot, face-flushing possibility that someone might say no feels enormous in your chest, like it could reshape your entire life. But here's what the actual data shows. People who do get rejected report that the rejection itself is rarely as brutal as they imagined. The anticipation was the poison, not the event. Your brain has been tricking you into believing that being turned down is a kind of social death when it's usually just a quiet, not for me, and then life continues exactly as it was before. You don't lose limbs, you don't lose your job, you don't lose your ability to eat lunch tomorrow. What gets wildly exaggerated is not the rejection itself, but the story you attach to it, that it means something irreversible about your worth, about your attractiveness, about who you'll be. The real cost of overestimating rejection's danger is not that you'll experience rejection, it's that you'll avoid experiences you'd actually want. You'll leave conversations unstarted. You'll stay quiet when you could have spoken. You'll choose safe and small over uncertain and possible, and that's the hidden tax. Not the rare moments someone says no, but all the moments you said no to yourself first, the ones nobody else even knew about. The gap between what rejection actually feels like and what your anxious mind promises it will feel like is where your real life lives. On the other side of that gap, waiting. Next time fear of rejection bubbles up, try naming what you're actually afraid of. Not the 2-second answer, but the story underneath. Usually it cracks pretty fast once you look at it straight. Rejection, sensitivity, self-fulfilling. You walk into a room and someone doesn't smile at you right away. Your stomach drops. They hate you. They're annoyed you're here. You spend the next hour stiff, distant, defensive, reading every micro-expression like a threat assessment. By the time you leave, they barely remember you existed. Mission accomplished. The rejection you feared so badly, you unconsciously created it. People who carry old wounds around abandonment or judgment tend to armor up before anyone even lands the punch. They scan for signs of disinterest obsessively, and their nervous system is so primed to detect it that it finds it everywhere, even in neutral spaces. A partner scrolls their phone during dinner, and it means they're losing interest. A text takes 2 hours, and it means you're being ghosted. The mind collects evidence for a conclusion it's already made. Because you're braced for the blow, you telegraph that tension to the other person. You become withdrawn. You test them. You push them away to prove you knew they were leaving anyway. You withdraw first, so the sting belongs to you, not them. Here's what makes this vicious. You're not wrong about what you're sensing. You're just misreading it. Their tiredness isn't rejection. Their space isn't coldness. But your behavior in response becomes real. You create the distance you were terrified of. The only way out is to notice the moment the alarm goes off. Breathe and ask someone directly instead of letting your nervous system write their story for them. That one sentence, "I'm noticing I feel distant right now and I want to check in," can break the whole cycle before it swallows you. The liking gap after conversation. You walk out of a first date feeling like you nailed it. The conversation flowed, you laughed together, but then you find yourself refreshing your phone, waiting for their text, quietly rehearsing why they might not call back. Meanwhile, they're doing the same thing in reverse, replaying the date and convinced they weren't interesting enough. This asymmetry is the liking gap, and it operates like a brutal joke at the end of every real conversation. Research shows that after meeting someone, you consistently underestimate how much they liked you. You assume they were bored by your story about your family vacation. You think your laugh was too loud. You replay the moment you said something awkward and decide that sealed it. But they were actually charmed. They were nervous too. They went home and told a friend about you. The gap exists because you have access to your own internal anxiety, the stumbles, the self-doubt, the moments you felt awkward, but you can't see theirs. You assume your messiness was visible to them the way it's visible to you. They assume the same. So two people who actually enjoyed each other both leave convinced the other person was underwhelmed. The practical trap, that doubt makes you text less, seem less interested, pull back exactly when reciprocal warmth would close the gap. The reframe isn't toxic positivity. It's this. If someone spent 2 hours with you and kept showing up, they probably liked it more than you think. Not because you're perfect, but because they were probably as nervous as you were. The beautiful mess effect. There's a person in your past, maybe still in your present, who you found wildly attractive, not despite their chaos, but somehow because of it. The unpredictability. the emotional weather, the way they'd cancel plans and then text you something so raw and honest, it rewired your entire evening. You told yourself you were drawn to their depth, their realness, their refusal to play it safe. What you might not have noticed is that the mess itself had become the hook. Difficulty masquerades as depth all the time. We confuse emotional intensity with emotional maturity, confuse inconsistency with mystery, confuse someone's ability to hurt us with their ability to move us. A person who is genuinely broken and self-aware looks almost identical on the surface to someone who is just broken and stuck. One actively works to change, the other makes you feel needed in a way that keeps them exactly as they are, cycling through the same patterns that drew you in the first place. Here's the real trap. Messiness creates narrative. An easy, stable, consistently kind person doesn't need explaining, doesn't demand your detective work. But someone volatile, someone whose moods shift like weather systems, someone whose attention is a prize you have to earn, that person generates endless internal storytelling. You become a fixer, a believer in their potential. That story feels like love. It feels like depth. It feels like you're in something real, not comfortable. The plot twist keeps you hooked when simplicity would set you free. Before you chase someone because their damage feels like poetry, ask yourself one thing. Would you still love them if they were already healed? Vulnerability and the pratfall. You know that moment when someone you're attracted to trips, literally stumbles, or says something awkward, or admits they're nervous, and suddenly they feel more real to you? That crack in the polished surface is called the pratfall effect, and it's one of the strangest bridges between admiration and affection. When someone competent or confident shows a small flaw, they don't shrink in our estimation, they bloom. The armor comes off, and we feel permission to be closer, but here's what makes it tricky in dating. Vulnerability only works when it lands on a foundation of basic competence first. If someone is flawed from the start, adding more cracks just looks like instability. If someone is polished and untouchable, a small human moment makes them magnetizing. The timing matters enormously. Share your doubt too early when you're still building trust and you look unreliable. Share it after you've shown up and delivered and you look brave. That's why the best first date isn't one where you perform perfectly. It's one where you show up consistently enough that a genuine stumble feels like honesty, not weakness. The paradox is that the people who attract us most are rarely the ones who reveal everything immediately. They're the ones who let us see them fail at something small, but we can sense they're handling bigger things quietly and steadily. That's the real pull. Not perfection, not radical transparency, but the quiet confidence that you can falter and still be standing. That's what makes someone feel safe enough to move closer. It's the strength underneath the humanness that does it. As self-disclosure reciprocity spiral. You tell someone something tender about your past and they lean in and tell you something tender back. Now you're both a little more exposed, so you go deeper. They match you again. By the end of the night, you feel like you've known each other for years, even though you met 3 hours ago. This is the reciprocity spiral, and it's one of the most efficient trust-building machines humans have ever invented, which also means it's one of the easiest to mistake for actual compatibility. The mechanism is simple. Vulnerability feels intimate, and when someone mirrors your vulnerability, your brain reads that as, this person gets me and this person trusts me. Both of those are intoxicating, but here's where it gets tricky. The spiral moves fast. You might share something real because they created a safe space, and they respond by sharing something equally raw. The thing is, they might have been waiting to tell someone that story for weeks. Their readiness to go deep doesn't necessarily mean they're drawn to you specifically. It means the moment opened a door they wanted to walk through. The danger isn't vulnerability itself, it's confusing the pace of disclosure with the depth of connection. Someone who shares fast might be emotionally intelligent and ready, or they might be lonely or settling or testing if you're someone they can eventually trust. You don't know yet. The spiral feels like progress. It is progress toward intimacy, but not necessarily toward knowing if you actually belong together. Slow down just enough to notice who they are between the vulnerable moments. Fast friends escalating questions. 3 hours vanishes at a party because they're asking you things nobody usually asks. Not, what do you do? But, what was the moment you realized you weren't the person you thought you were? Something cracks open. You answer honestly. They do the same. By midnight, you feel closer to this stranger than to people you've known for years. A researcher named Arthur Aaron proved that complete strangers become emotionally intimate in 45 minutes using progressively deeper questions. The mechanism is pure permission. When someone asks you something real before your armor has time to harden, your brain reads their courage as safety and matches it back and forth like emotional tennis where the rules keep shifting and nobody's keeping score. The trap arrives later, usually alone at 2 a.m., when you realize that intensity felt like recognition but might have been excellent synchrony, perfect timing, good listening, the luck of meeting someone who happened to be open that night. You shared things you don't share with longtime friends. They felt present in a way people usually don't, but presence in a moment isn't the same as presence over time. The spell breaks when they don't text back or ask another deep question for weeks. The intimacy you both created was real, but it was also temporary, built on novelty and the thrill of being finally seen. Before you decide someone is your person, ask yourself a harder question. Do they ask the same deep questions on a boring Tuesday, or only when the chemistry is electric and the night feels like it might matter? The difference between intimacy and intoxication is whether someone shows up when there's nothing spectacular to feel. Breadcrumbing and intermittent hope, midnight and your phone glows with it, a like on an old Instagram post, a text saying, "Hey, been thinking about you." Nothing committal, nothing that asks for a real conversation. Your chest lifts for a second, then nothing for weeks. Then the like appears again on a different photo, or they message once when they're drunk or bored or caught between other people. You stay half ready, half hopeful, because the crumbs are just real enough to keep the possibility alive. Your brain doesn't distinguish between steady attention and random hits when something matters. Affection, reciprocation, proof you were remembered. Random might actually hook harder. Slot machines aren't addictive because they pay out all the time. They're addictive because you never know which pull will win. The unpredictability wires you tighter than predictable love ever could. The person breadcrumbing you might not be a villain. They might genuinely like you, but not want commitment, or they're keeping you as soft ground between other relationships, or they're afraid of real connection. What matters isn't their intention, but your reality. You're staying emotionally available to someone choosing not to show up, and every small crumb resets your hope timer. The way out isn't willpower, it's the hard look. Do the crumbs come with actual plans, actual presence, actual texture, or do they come with your own interpretation of what they might mean? The story you're telling yourself about a person barely speaking. If it's the latter, you're not in a relationship. You're in a conversation with yourself, and that conversation is the cage, ghosting, and ambiguous loss. You're texting someone you've been seeing for 3 months. The conversation feels real. Plans, inside jokes, that specific way they text you back. Then nothing. A day passes. 2, you check your phone compulsively. Did they lose it? Are they sick? But deep down, you know they're choosing silence, and that ambiguity is what eats you alive. Ghosting isn't rejection in the traditional sense. It's rejection without explanation, without closure, without the chance to grieve properly. Most breakups hurt because you understand why. With ghosting, your brain gets stuck in a loop, rewriting the relationship over and over, looking for the invisible line where it all went wrong. Did I text too much? Was I too available? Not available enough? The person who ghosted you becomes a mirror you can't stop looking in because they never gave you a script for how the story ended. Therapists call this ambiguous loss, grief without a clear object, mourning for something that was never fully defined in the first place. You didn't lose a partner, you lost the story you were writing together, and that story had no ending. The cruelty of ghosting isn't just the rejection, it's the unanswered question. Your nervous system stays activated, waiting for a text that will never come. Because you can't close that loop, you carry it forward into the next relationship, half waiting for history to repeat. If you've been ghosted, try something counterintuitive. Close the story yourself. Write the ending you need, even if they won't. The worst part isn't that they left, it's that you're still waiting.